For 4 years, Maximus devoted himself entirely to training. Each day, after completing his imperial duties, he would retreat to the courtyard, where he honed his magic proficiency for hours, pushing himself to new limits before finally collapsing into a hot bath and then to bed. Yet magic was not the only skill he sharpened. He trained in every weapon he could get his hands on. Heavy checkmark one-handed swords, his bread and butter, where his mastery was already unmatched. Heavy checkmark two-handed greatswords, requiring immense strength but rewarding with devastating force. Heavy checkmark halberds, perfect for defensive formations and brutal counterattacks. Heavy checkmark dual-wielding, maximizing agility and speed, overwhelming opponents in rapid succession. Heavy checkmark archery, ensuring he had deadly precision at any range. Through pain and repetition, he became a master of war, his body and mind forged into a weapon sharper than Valyrian steel. Westeros and the Academy of Excellence. During these years, his relationship with Robert Baratheon improved significantly. To appease Robert's demands, Maximus gifted him the grandiose bed he had been whining about, earning his favor. More importantly, Maximus allowed lords from Westeros to send their heirs and heiresses to study at the Academy of Excellence in Heaven's Reach. However, not all institutions were open to Westerosi nobles. Heavy checkmark Imperial Academy of War, off-limits. This academy trained the future officers of the Imperial Union, shaping them into the finest military minds. Allowing outsiders in would be unacceptable. Heavy checkmark Academy of Mystical Studies, off-limits. Only those proficient in magic were granted entry. No foreigner would gain access to the imperial secrets of magic. The Westerosi response. With the agreement signed in 292 AC, Robert sent ravens across the Seven Kingdoms, announcing this groundbreaking opportunity. The first to seize it? Heavy checkmark minor houses like the Freys, Tarleys, and Mormonts, eager to elevate their status in Westeros. Heavy checkmark they sent multiple heirs and heiresses, desperate to secure an advantage. As the years passed, even powerful houses like the Tyrells and Tullis became curious. Heavy checkmark they saw the potential in sending their children to an advanced institution, recognizing that the world was changing fast. The cautious houses? Heavy checkmark the Lannisters and Baratheons sent only a handful of lesser family members, waiting to see results before committing further. Heavy checkmark the Starks, traditionalists, reluctant to engage in foreign institutions, preferring to observe. Resistance and threats. By 294 AC, not all Westerosi houses were pleased. Heavy checkmark some saw it as a betrayal of their traditions. Heavy checkmark others feared a shift in the balance of power. Small petty houses resorted to extreme measures, using bandits, mercenaries, and hired thugs to kidnap noble children traveling to the Academy of Excellence. Their mistake? They underestimated the reach of the Shadow Hand. Heavy checkmark Faraday intercepted every single attempt, rendering their schemes useless. Heavy checkmark in retaliation, Maximus pressured Robert to take action. Robert's weak response and Maximus's retaliation. Heavy checkmark Robert, unwilling to make enemies, merely sent a royal decree ordering the lords to cease their activities. Heavy checkmark the lords publicly complied, but continued their plots in secret. They forgot one thing. Maximus played by different rules. Heavy checkmark in response, he sent dragon riders to fly over the estates of every noble house involved. Heavy checkmark the terrifying sight of dragons circling above their lands was enough to crush any lingering resistance. Complaints poured in, but Maximus ignored them. The final year of training, 295 AC. By 295 AC, Maximus had achieved 100% mastery over magic. His training was over. Standing outside the imperial palace, he prepared to depart for his greatest challenge yet. Before him stood Lilith and Merlin, his two most trusted allies. Without warning, heavy checkmark Merlin grabbed his head, pulling him into her chest. Heavy checkmark Lilith hugged him from behind, nearly suffocating him. Maximus wasn't complaining. After a few long seconds, "Heavy check mark. We'll hold down the fort while you're gone," Merlin said with a smirk. "Heavy check mark. Just make sure to come back in one piece," Lilith added. Maximus smiled. "You have my word." Turning, he strode toward Nyxera, his majestic dragon, who waited for him. With a single motion, he mounted her. Heavy check mark, wings spread wide. Heavy check mark, a powerful gust of wind. Heavy check mark, the ground trembled as Nyxera took off into the skies. Maximus was on his way to the Bone Mountains, toward the greatest test of his life. The trial of ascension begins. Maximus's destination was a cave within the Bone Mountains, where he would undergo for brutal trials. Heavy check mark, he could only bring weapons and gear purchased from a system. Heavy check mark, once the trials began, the system would be inaccessible, only providing notifications of his progress. Nyxera soared through the skies, flanked by 10 dragon knights in escort formation. Heavy check mark, their mission? Heavy check mark, escort Maximus to the edge of the Dothraki Sea. Heavy check mark, establish a forward camp as a reaction force in case anything went wrong. After 20 hours, they reached the Dothraki border, where the Dragon Knights broke off to make camp. Nyxera pressed onward alone. Another 5 hours until they reached a hidden clearing deep within the Bone Mountains. Upon landing, she lowered her head, allowing Maximus to dismount. Heavy check mark, he leaned against her head, exhaling deeply. Heavy check mark, she nudged him toward the cave. "I wish I could bring you with me," Maximus muttered. Nyxera gently rubbed against him. Heavy check mark, "If I could go, it wouldn't be a challenge. Becoming a demigod is something only you can achieve." He sighed. She was right. Steeling himself, he turned toward the cave's entrance. A familiar presence. Something felt off. Extending his hand toward the cave's entrance. Heavy check mark, it passed through an illusionary veil. Heavy check mark, before he could react, an unseen force yanked him inside. Sword drawn. Defensive stance. But, heavy check mark, his eyes widened. Heavy check mark, standing before him was someone he had seen before. A woman, glowing with divine energy. The very same goddess who had brought him into this world. Heavy check mark, "Nice to see you again, Maximus," she greeted. Maximus narrowed his eyes. "I didn't expect you to be here." She smiled mischievously. "As the creator of the system, I like to oversee important moments like this." Maximus nodded slowly. Heavy check mark. "How dangerous will these challenges be?" Her smile grew. Heavy check mark? "Oh, you could die. But with your weapons and armor, you should be fine." Maximus blinked. "Wait, what?" Before he could say another word. Heavy check mark, she snapped her fingers. Heavy check mark, the world spun. The last thing he heard was, "Heavy check mark, good luck." And then, heavy check mark, darkness. "Good luck." The last words echoed in Maximus' mind before his surroundings shifted in an instant. The cold, damp cave vanished, replaced by a searing heat that pounded against his body like a hammer. A river of lava churned to his right, casting a hellish glow over jagged volcanic rock. The very air shimmered, waves of heat pressing down on him like an unseen force, making his breathing heavy and labored. He instinctively tightened his grip on the dual swords at his sides. The armor of radiance and the blades of dusk and dawn. Heavy check mark, armor. Radiance of the Dawn cost 40,000 system points. Heavy check mark, effects. Doubles magic attack power. Grants immunity to all debuffs, poison, curses, etc. Heavy check mark, weapons. Duskfang and Dawn's here cost 60,000 system points. Heavy check mark, effects. Doubles attack speed. Boosts critical strike chance by 50%. The armor provided incredible protection, but it offered no resistance to heat. Maximus could feel the scorching air even through the metal plates, and his body already glistened with sweat. "This is going to be hell," he muttered, wiping his brow as he moved forward. The arena of fire. After several minutes of walking through the volcanic terrain, the tunnel opened up into a massive arena. Heavy check mark, jagged rock formations jutted out like the teeth of a beast. Heavy check mark, molten veins pulsed through the cracks in the earth. Heavy check mark, the ground trembled beneath his boots like something was lurking beneath the surface. Then, the tremor intensified. The lava river surged, sending waves of molten rock crashing against the cavern walls. And then, the ground split open. From the massive chasm rose a beast of fire and destruction. The flames of eternity. Fire, a monstrous creature, emerged from the depths of hell itself. Heavy checkmark, 4 massive legs, each one like a pillar of molten stone, stomped onto the ground, causing many earthquakes. Heavy checkmark, flaming wings unfurled, each feather made of pure fire, radiating unbearable heat. Heavy checkmark, its face, twisted into a demonic snarl, glowed with molten light, and rows of jagged, glowing teeth pulsed with searing heat. Heavy checkmark, a massive, spiked tail lashed behind it, but this tail had a mouth of its own, dripping molten rock like saliva. Fire, its entire body burned with an eternal flame, a living inferno, consuming everything in its wake. It let out a roar so powerful that the entire cavern shook, sending tremors that rattled Maximus' bones. Maximus didn't flinch. Instead, he exhaled, calming his mind, sharpening his focus. Just got to survive. The battle begins. Crossed swords, Maximus charged forward, his twin swords glowing with magical energy. The speed buff from Duskfang and Dawn's Here allowed him to close the distance in an instant. The beast slammed its claws into the ground, sending molten boulders flying in every direction. Fireboom! Maximus dodged, weaving through the storm of flaming debris, his reflexes pushed to the limit. And then, he struck. Collision, Duskfang carved into the creature's molten flesh. A deep gash opened on its side, molten blood hissing as it splattered onto the ground. The beast let out a furious howl, spinning with inhuman speed for its size. Firecrack! The tail whipped out, slamming into Maximus' chest with the force of a collapsing mountain. He was sent flying, crashing into the scorching rock floor, just inches from the lava river. His armor absorbed most of the impact, but his ribs still ached from the blow. With a grunt of pain, he flipped back onto his feet, just in time to see a wave of lava rushing toward him. Fire, 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 whoosh. Maximus dodged, rolling to the side at the last second. The ground where he had just been standing melted away, the air filled with the scent of burning stone. Let's not get burned alive in the first few minutes, he muttered. Aerial assault. Fire, the flames of eternity, took to the sky. Its wings of fire beat down, sending waves of scorching air cascading through the arena. It hovered high above, its molten eyes locked onto Maximus. Fire boom, boom, boom. It began to rain down massive fireballs, each one the size of a boulder, crashing into the battlefield. Fire boom, fire boom, fire boom. Maximus zigzagged between the explosions, his speed buffs barely keeping him ahead of the destructive bombardment. He couldn't keep dodging forever. He needed to end this. Now, the final strike. Crossed swords, Maximus sprinted forward, his twin swords held at the ready. Fire, the creature's tail lashed toward him. Collision, but he twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the strike. Fire, it opened its massive jaws, preparing to unleash a final wave of hellfire. Collision, Maximus leapt forward, his speed buff propelling him faster than ever before. Crossed swords, Duskfang tore into the creature's underbelly. Crossed swords, Dawn's Here followed, slicing through its molten core. Fire, the beast let out a final, agonized roar. Fire, lava exploded from its body. Fire, its molten skin cracked, falling away in burning chunks. Fire, the entire cavern trembled as the creature collapsed, its fire fading, leaving behind nothing but a smoldering husk. Fire, the flames of eternity was no more. The next trial awaits. Fire, Maximus stood amidst the carnage, his chest rising and falling heavily. He had done it. Trial 1 was complete, but there were 3 more to go. Before he could even take a breath, Collision, the goddess, appeared again, with a mere flick of her fingers. Fire, the entire battlefield dissolved around him. Fire, and just like that, he was somewhere new. But this time, he sat down, ignoring his new surroundings. Yeah, no, he muttered. I'm taking a damn break before the next fight. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The next trial could wait.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Maximus had arrived in some dark room, which turned out to be an empty wooden room. He used his magic and created a small white orb, which lit the area around him. He didn't see or sense anything from his immediate area, so he sat on the wooden floor as the notification of the completion of his first trial popped up. There were no rewards or anything else, just words. First trial completed. Conquer the flames of eternity. After the pop-up disappeared, he lay down on the wooden floor to rest. As he rested for half an hour, Maximus thought about the things that happened during his first trial. The flames of eternity wasn't as difficult as he thought. It was just avoiding stepping into the lava that he was worried about. And the only magic that he used was the magic enhancement ability, which coated his sword in pure magic energy, allowing him to cut through anything, and the passive magic body shield ability, which reinforced his body's durability. Because of these two abilities, which were always active during combat, he restricted himself from using other magic to conserve his energy. At the start, he didn't know how long the fight was going to go on for, nor how strong the creature was going to be until the fight actually started. After the first few minutes of the fight, he determined that he didn't need to use his other magic as a way to conserve energy. And now, after being thrown into the next trial, he was glad that he made that decision, as now he knew that each trial would be back-to-back without getting a full day of rest. Seeing him rest so peacefully, the goddess decided that he had rested enough and had started his trial. Not even 20 minutes after closing his eyes, he felt the wooden floor around him start to spin. Taking out his sword, he stabbed it into the wooden floor as the room flipped upside down before returning to its original position. But now, instead of the peace and quiet that he heard before, he heard the sound of the ocean outside. It can't be. Looking to the far side of the room, he saw a door which he hadn't noticed before. He carefully walked towards the door while trying to maintain his balance. This is a ship, he thought, based off his previous experience of sailing on his own ship. And what he heard outside was indeed the sound of the ocean knocking against the side of the ship. Opening the door, the scent of salt water hit his nostrils and confirmed his suspicions. The roars of waves crashing against the hill filled his ears as he stepped out onto the ship's deck. Meanwhile, all around him, all he could see was storms raging all around him. Sensing something from his right, he turned his head and saw a massive wave traveling towards the right side of the ship. This wave was going to crash into the ship, causing it to tilt to left side and potentially sinking it. Reaching his hands out, he created a hole that stretched as long as the ship within the wave, preventing the ship from tilting over. However, as the wave passed, he saw another ship with what appeared to be some strange sea creatures on it. But before he had time to actually see what was on the ship, almost a dozen grappling hooks with ropes had landed on ship and began to pull both ships closer together. In response, Maximus ran to try and cut the ropes, but some strange sea creature had jumped out of the water in front of him armed with two cutlasses. "Where do you think you're going, mate?" the creature said in pirate voice. The creature standing in front of him looked like some weird human and hammerhead shark hybrid. "Image here. Where's the welcoming party, mate?" Maximus asked in his own mock pirate voice, smirking at the weird hybrid of a creature. "Oh, you'll be getting your welcome soon enough," replied the creature as it swung its two cutlasses at Maximus, preventing him from taking out the grappling hooks. Maximus drew Duskfang and cut the two cutlasses in half before swinging back around to cut the head off of the Sharkman hybrid. The creature didn't have the speed to dodge, and its head was separated from its body, which hit the deck. He was about to go start cutting off the grappling hooks, but more of the Sharkman creatures were already climbing aboard his ship. Maximus tightened his grip on Duskfang as more of the hybrid pirates climbed onto the deck, their hands grasping cutlasses, harpoons, and rusted pistols. The storm raged around them, lightning flashing against the night sky, illuminating the battle about to unfold. The scent of salt, blood, and damp would fill the air as the Sharkmen encircled him, their predatory eyes and faces filled with malice. "Looks like we got ourselves a fighter, boys," one of them snarled, brandishing his cutlass. "Captain will want his head fair sure." Maximus didn't wait for them to make the first move as he charged forward. One creature lunged at him, aiming a harpoon at his chest. Maximus brought Duskfang down in an arc, slicing through the harpoon shaft and the creature's arm in one swift motion. The hybrid howled, staggering back before Maximus finished him with a clean stab through the heart. More enemies attacked at once, but Maximus enhanced his movements with magic, making him look like a blur. He twisted, parried, and swung both Duskfang and Dawn's ear, each attack meant to incapacitate or kill. His magic-enhanced body allowed him to move faster and hit harder than the Sharkman anticipated, and soon the deck was nothing but seawater and the blood of his foes. Suddenly, the ship shook violently as the enemy vessel collided with his. The impact nearly threw Maximus off balance, but he kept his balance, raising his sword just in time to block a heavy blow from an incoming opponent. The force behind the strike was greater than the others before, and when he locked eyes with his new foe, he realized why. Standing before him was a towering figure, larger and more menacing than the rest. This was no ordinary pirate. It was probably the captain. The creature was an imposing great white shark hybrid, his massive frame draped in a long coat adorned with gold trimmings. His left hand was a massive hook with a piece of sword attached to his elbow, while his right hand held a large anchor. Hanging from his waist was a lantern and flintlock pistol, and his left leg was gone, replaced by a wooden leg. "So ye be the one causing a ruckus on me ship?" the captain rumbled. "You got some fight in ye, lad. But this here be my waters, and ye be nothing but chum." Image here. Maximus smirked, rolling his shoulders as he readied his stance. "Big talk for a fish in a coat. Let's see if you can back it up." The captain let out a chuckle before lunging with surprising speed, his handheld anchor cleaving through the air. Maximus barely managed to parry. The sheer force of the strike pushed him back. He knew immediately that this was going to be an interesting fight. Maximus skidded back, his boots scraping against the wet wooden deck as he absorbed the impact of the anchor's swing. The raw power behind it was something else. The force alone had nearly knocked Duskfang from his grasp. This Sharkman captain was no joke. Not wanting to give the pirate another chance to attack, he lunged forward, channeling magic into his sword. His blade gleamed with a faint, white glow as he slashed at the captain's torso. But the shark hybrid was faster than he looked. He twisted his massive body, letting the swing hit nothing but the wind. The captain countered instantly, swinging his anchor in a wide arc. Maximus ducked in time, feeling the wind from the attack rush past his head. The impact against the deck shattered the wood beneath them, splinters flying in every direction. Not want to get caught in the next swing, Maximus flipped backward and lifted his free hand. He created a translucent barrier in front of him just as the captain brought his anchor down again. The heavy weapon slammed into the shield with a deafening boom, sending shockwaves through the air. The barrier held, absorbing all of the impact. "Magica," the captain sneered, stepping back. "That be a dirty trick, landlubber." Maximus smirked as he looked at the anchor in the captain's left hand. Says the guy swinging an anchor like it's a toy. Maximus focused a portion of his magic around his feet, enhancing his speed further. In a blur, he dashed to the side, appearing behind the captain before slashing at his exposed back. This time, his sword found its target. The enchanted blade sliced through flesh, cutting a deep gash across the captain's back. The Sharkman roared in pain, staggering forward. But instead of retreating, he turned at terrifying speed, swinging his hook arm toward Maximus's throat. Maximus brought his sword up in time to deflect the strike, and this time he strengthened the grip on his feet so that he wouldn't slide again. He needed to end this quickly. This thing had both strength and endurance, and the longer the fight dragged on, the worse it would be for him in the long run. Maximus slammed his palm onto the wet deck, sending out a wave of magic. The wooden planks beneath the captain's feet suddenly buckled under his weight. The pirate captain stumbled slightly, giving Maximus the opening he needed. Boosting his strength, Maximus dashed forward, Duskfang glowing with magic. He drove the sword straight through the captain's chest, piercing through muscle and bone, and then upward, splitting the captain in half. Sheathing his swords, he walked to the side of the ship and leaned on it, trying to catch his breath before he was pulled out. He waited and waited, but nothing happened, until his senses started going crazy as some large humanoid creature emerged from the ocean. It raised its hand and, in an instant, swung at the ship, splitting it in half. Image here. Just before the creature did this, Maximus jumped high into the air, avoiding the ship's destruction. As he soared above the wreckage, he got a clear look at the creature responsible. It was a monstrous humanoid sea beast, towering at least 30 feet tall, claws, and had no face, just a head with a bunch of tentacles. Maximus barely had time to process what he was seeing before the creature let out a deep roar, sending a shock wave through the air. The surrounding ocean shook violently, as if responding to the creature's rage. Midair, Maximus formed a platform beneath his feet, allowing him to remain standing in the air. He rubbed his temples in frustration before launching himself straight at the creature. He drew both Duskfang and Dawn's here, his blades glowing with magical energy. The sea creature swung its massive, clawed hand toward him, trying to swat him out of the sky. Maximus threw Dawn's here in the air, controlling it with magic, as he also formed a lightning whip with his now empty hand. He wrapped the whip around the creature's incoming hand and sent a wave of lightning into the creature's body. The creature screeched as the lightning traveled through its body. Its skin began to burn from the amount of energy. The shock sent tremors through the ocean. Maximus smirked, pulling hard on the lightning whip, using it to yank himself forward. As he closed the distance, he pulled Dawn's ear back to his free hand, the blade spinning through the air before landing perfectly in his hand. With both swords, he slashed at the creature's chest, carving deep gashes into its flesh. The sea creature howled in pain. It retaliated by swinging its hand upward, aiming to crush Maximus like an insect. Instead of dodging outright, Maximus timed his movement perfectly. Just before impact, he created a magic platform beneath his feet, launching himself high above the creature's attack. Midair, he extended his hand forward, as magic condensed into a bright sphere. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it downward. The sphere struck the sea creature's chest, detonating on impact. A shock wave erupted from the blast, sending seawater spraying in all directions. The beast reeled back, screaming in agony as a fiery explosion scorched its flesh, leaving behind a smoking crater where the attack had landed. But the creature was far from finished. Despite the damage, it lifted one clawed hand high above its head. Then, with a growl, the creature slammed its hand into the ocean, sending a colossal tidal wave racing toward Maximus. The wave was so high that he couldn't just jump over it. So, thinking quickly, he created a dome-like barrier of magic, reinforced with wind magic to slice through the wave's force instead of merely absorbing it. As the towering wall of water crashed against his shield, the magic split the wave into two halves, forcing it to divert around him. The moment the wave passed, however, the creature was right in his face and managed to grab him with one of its tentacles, wrapping his entire body and dragging him underwater. Maximus quickly created an air bubble around his head, allowing him to breathe while the creature continued to drag him. Then, controlling his swords telepathically, he used one of them to cut him free, while the other one cut the creature's arms off. The creature turned around and with its other hand tried to grab Maximus again, but this time with Duskfang and Dawn's here in his hand. He focused his magic energy, forming a single, massive blade of pure, concentrated magic. With a single slash, he brought both blades down upon the creature's body. The concentrated magic cut through the ocean, and the creature's flesh and bones like it was nothing, cutting its body into 3 pieces. The creature had stopped moving and started to sink to the bottom of the ocean. Reaching the surface, Maximus breathed heavily as he hovered in the air. As he was catching his breath, his surroundings had changed once again after just a single blink. His magic had deactivated, and he fell face first in the dirt, not worrying about anything, He just lay there and didn't move as he was a little tired. 2 down, 2 more to go. Maximus groaned as he pushed himself up from the dirt, spitting out a mouthful of dust. His body ached from the fatigue of the last battle, but he had no time to dwell on it. The moment his eyes adjusted to his new surroundings, he realized that he was in some type of forest. And if you remember correctly, the third trial was supposed to be on a floating island which consisted of powerful winds and lightning storms. But looking up, all he could see was the tall trees which covered his view of the sky. However, he did notice a unique feeling in the air, a kind of static electricity all over his skin. He stood up slowly, checking his waist to make sure his 2 swords were there. Feeling the 2 swords on each side of his waist, he turned his attention to the new world he was now in. Looks like nature's graveyard, he murmured to himself as he noticed the gnarly roots and skeletal remains of trees that was mixed in with the dense forest greenery. Some areas there were dead trees, and there was some nice greenery. Not knowing which way to go, Maximus decided to just choose a random direction and proceed. So, he started walking west, towards where the light of the sun seemed to be fading. The further he went, the denser the forest got. The less light could be seen through the tall trees above. The wind started to pick up, rustling the leaves around him. Somewhere off in the distance, he could hear what sounded like thunder. For a moment, he paused, listening closely to his surroundings because he sensed something was off, but whenever he stopped, he could no longer sense anything. Aware that something or someone was watching him, he unsheathed dusk fong and dawn's here and continued walking. Suddenly, a dozen arrows were shot towards him from the shadows of the trees. Reacting quickly, Maximus jumped backwards, forming a magic shield in front of him to block the arrows. The barrage of arrows hit the magic shield and landed on the ground. From behind the trees, a bunch of skeletons, armed with bows and swords, emerged from the darkness, their empty eye sockets glowing with a blue light. Maximus tightened his grip on his swords, scanning the skeletal warriors as they advanced. They appeared to be just regular skeletons with nothing unique about them. One of the skeletons let out a shriek and charged first, swinging a rusted sword down towards Maximus's head. Maximus blocked the attack with Dawn's here and then used Duskfong to slash through the skeleton's ribcage, shattering its bones into pieces. The undead warrior collapsed, its body turning into dusk as it vanished. More skeletons rushed forward, 2 of them attacking in unison with their swords, while another drew an arrow and aimed at Maximus's chest. He deflected both sword strikes with Duskfong before spinning his body to avoid the arrow. In retaliation, he spun low, slicing through the legs of one of the skeletons and kicking the other backwards into a tree, shattering its spine. Another volley of arrows came flying from the shadows. Maximus conjured another magic shield, deflecting all of the arrows, and then rushing forward towards the remaining undead, cutting them down. Bones fell to the ground and vanished as the last skeleton fell, its skull rolling to a stop at Maximus's feet before disappearing. From what he knew about the undead, he gathered that the ambush had been too well coordinated for some mindless undead like skeletons. This wasn't just a random attack. Someone or something was controlling them, and he had an idea of where to look. Following the same path, he kept going through the dense forest as the wind and thunderstorms began to pick up. The longer he walked, the more intense the weather got, and the more skeletons he encountered increased. As he made it to the center of the dense forest, the tall trees had disappeared, and a large clearing of flatland could be seen. Floating above the flatland, there was a massive island with a castle floating on top of it. "Holy, how am I supposed to get up there?" he whispered to himself. He could use the magic platforms and walk up there, but it would be a long way he would have to walk. As he was thinking about what to do, a large object coming from the floating island crashed into the ground right in front of him, sending dirt flying in all directions. Before the first could even touch the ground, a shadow moving at crazy speed had launched itself towards Maximus, catching him completely off guard. He didn't have time to properly defend himself without getting injured, so he sacrificed his left arm to the attack. The strength behind the attack not only cut a portion of his left arm off, but sent him crashing through the remains of a few dead trees before skidding across the ground. The pain traveled through his body, but he gritted his teeth, quickly rolling to his feet despite searing pain in his severed left arm. Blood dripped onto the soil while he kept his eyes on the figure in front of him. Standing amidst the dust and debris was an undead knight clad in ancient, battle-worn armor. His skeletal body was wrapped in a tattered black cape, and blue flames burned in the empty sockets of his skull. In his hand, he held a jagged great sword that had remnants of Maximus's own blood on the cursed blade. Thanks to his armor, which gave him immunity against curses, he wasn't affected by whatever curse the sword had. With his right hand, Maximus grabbed Duskfang, while his super healing kicked in to stop the bleeding. He only needed to grab his severed arm, and he would be able to reattach his arm thanks to his super healing, but he doubted the undead knight would grant him that luxury. Not giving him a chance to rest, the knight charged again. Maximus barely had time to react, dodging to the side as the sword hit the ground where he stood, splitting the earth. With his sword in the ground, Maximus countered by charging and swinging at the knight's torso with Dawn's Here, but the knight managed to dodge, leaving Dawn's Here to only scrape the ancient armor that the knight was wearing. The knight responded with a backhand strike, his armored fist connecting with Maximus's ribs, but this time he had time to create a barrier around his body, absorbing the damage from the knight's hand. The knight pulled his fist back, allowing Maximus to get in close, feinting an attack before twisting his body, bringing Duskfang up in a long arc. The swing connected, severing the knight's left arm at the elbow. The undead knight didn't flinch. Instead, he drove a knee into Maximus's stomach, lifting him off his feet before slamming him back down. The attack did no damage, but hitting the ground caused the world to blur for a moment. But Maximus refused to stay down. He rolled, avoiding another downward slash that split the ground, before retaliating with a kick that knocked the knight back a few paces. This allowed him to grab his severed arm and reattach it. Glancing down, he saw the flesh rapidly regenerate, bone knitting together, muscle forming, and skin sealing itself. Within moments, his arm was whole again. He flexed his fingers, feeling the strength come back. The knight hesitated for the first time. Whether it was recognition of Maximus's unnatural healing or simply surprise, Maximus didn't know. He wasn't about to waste the opportunity. He channeled magic onto his blades, creating two vibro blades coated with dark flames that would cut through the night. The knight swung his great sword in a final, desperate attack, but Maximus slid on the ground, barely dodging the sword. He drove Dawn's Here into the knight's ribcage, pinning him in place, before slashing upward with Duskfang, decapitating the undead warrior in one fluid motion. The knight's body crumbled to dust as it hit the ground, vanishing into the wind. The cursed sword fell to the ground before disintegrating into nothingness. The battle was over. As Maximus caught his breath, the ground beneath him began to tremble. He felt something wrapped around him as his body began to lift from the ground towards the floating island. It didn't take a genius to know what was going on, so he just watched as the magic floated him upward towards the floating island that was raging with storms and was the place where the final battle was to take place. After a few minutes, he landed lightly on the floating island, Duskfang and Dawn's Here at the ready in case of another attack. The island was barren except for the massive, ancient castle in the distance. All around the island, a massive thunderstorm was raging and strong winds whipped around him. Lightning flashes illuminated the skies, casting shadows across the landscape. As he began walking towards the castle, he could feel the air around him was filled with magical energy. Lightning had illuminated the path before him, as if guiding him along his path. After several minutes, he reached the castle's entrance, a drawbridge with a bottomless chasm beneath it. As he stepped on it, the wood creaked beneath his weight, but it held firm. He took another cautious step, eyes scanning the towering castle walls. The stone was ancient, dark with age, yet there was an eerie presence holding it together. The massive iron doors at the entrance slowly opened on their own. Beyond them lay a vast, dimly lit hall lined with towering statues of long-forgotten warriors, their stone eyes seeming to follow Maximus as he moved forward. Then, the door slammed shut behind him with a loud boom. That's when he heard a deep voice that echoed throughout the hall. "You have come far, mortal, but here in my domain, your journey ends." At the far end of the hall, a throne sat atop a dais, shrouded in mist. Upon it rested a figure clad in a blackened cloak and armor, with a black crown resting upon his head. His skull was also dark, and in his bony hands he held a great sword that pulsed with necrotic energy. The undead king had awoken. Image here, Maximus tightened his grip on his swords, his heart pounding. He had fought countless enemies before, but this presence, this raw malice, was unlike anything he had encountered. The undead king slowly stood up. With a single step forward, the ground trembled, and from the shadows of the hall, twisted forms began to rise. More than just skeletons, these were abominations of fused bones and rotting flesh, towering over Maximus with weapons integrated into their decayed limbs. Wanting to get the first strike in, Maximus dashed forward, slashing through the first abomination. His enchanted blades cut through its rotten flesh like butter, but the creature barely staggered. It swung a massive axe downward, forcing Maximus to roll to the side. Before he could counterattack, another abomination lunged from behind, claws targeting his back. His reflexes kicked in, causing him to spin in midair, conjuring a barrier to absorb the blow before countering with a double slash. Dawn's here burned with energy as it cut through the monstrosity, reducing it to ash. Duskfang followed immediately after, severing the other abomination's head. But more were coming. Dozens of undead horrors walked toward him from all sides, each more grotesque than the last. Maximus fought using as little magic power as he could, dodging, slashing, and countering each of the monstrosities. His swords singing through the air as he carved through the endless wave of undead. Still, they kept rising. The undead king watched from above, unmoving, his fiery eyes glowing with amusement. "You fight well, warrior, but let us see how you fare against true death." With a wave of his sword, a surge of dark energy erupted from the throne. The abominations Maximus had slain began to twitch and reassemble, their severed limbs reconnecting as if time itself had reversed. "Shit," Maximus cursed under his breath. "There's no end to them." Then, the air grew thick with malice. The temperature plummeted. A massive force crashed into him, sending him hurtling across the hall. He barely managed to flip to his feet before he saw it, another knight. Clad in the same tattered black armor as the undead king, this warrior moved with unnatural speed, its sword enchanted in blue flames. The Death Knight. It struck again, faster than lightning. Maximus barely managed to block, and the force sent him flying. He hit the ground hard, rolling to a stop. His arms burned from the impact, but there was no time to recover. The Death Knight was already upon him, swinging its blade in a downward arc. He rolled to the side, barely avoiding decapitation, and countered with Duskfang, but the knight parried with ease. Their swords clashed, energy from both swords spreading throughout the room with each strike. Maximus had fought many powerful warriors before, but this was something else. The Death Knight moved like a specter, always a step ahead, never slowing, never hesitating. Every attack was relentless, every motion precise. Maximus gritted his teeth. He needed to end this fast. Summoning every ounce of magic he had, he channeled more magic energy into his swords, causing them to glow with a blinding mix of light and shadow. Then, with a single powerful thrust, he broke the Death Knight's guard. Seizing the moment, he unleashed a devastating combination. Dawn's ear cut through its chest, while Duskfang severed its legs in a single fluid motion. The knight fell to its knees, its body filled with the remaining arcane energy that it had. Maximus drove both blades through its skull. The Death Knight let out an ear-shattering screech before its body disintegrated into nothingness. Silence followed, then a slow clap. The undead king had finally moved. Impressive, but now it is my turn. With a single step, he vanished from the throne. Before Maximus could react, a force struck him in the chest. The next thing he knew, he was flying through the castle walls, crashing into the storm-ridden skies outside. Lightning flashed all around him as he plummeted toward the floating island below. But before he could regain his balance, the undead king appeared above him, sword raised high. Maximus barely had time to raise his blades before the king's sword came down, shattering the air itself with its power. The real battle had begun. The impact was cataclysmic. The force of the undead king's strike sent shockwaves rippling through the storm, distorting the very air around them. Maximus braced with both swords, barely holding his ground as he was driven downward, his feet smashing into the floating island below, leaving a crater beneath him. The undead king descended like a phantom, his movements unnatural. Before Maximus could recover, another strike came, a horizontal slash, fast as lightning, infused with pure necrotic energy. Maximus barely dodged in time, ducking beneath the blade as it carved through the air, leaving a dark rift of death magic in its wake. He retaliated instantly as he aimed for the king's ribs, but the undead king simply disappeared out of existence, reappearing behind him in the blink of an eye. Too slow. A crushing kick sent Maximus soaring backward, slamming through a large rock formation. The pain barely registered as he flipped mid-air, using a burst of magic to stop himself before hitting the ground. He exhaled sharply, his eyes locked onto the undead king, whose burning gaze never wavered. Maximus knew he couldn't rely on brute force alone. His opponent was faster, stronger, and commanded death itself. He had to be smarter. Rushing forward, he unleashed a flurry of strikes, his dual blades switching between offense and defense. The undead king met him blow for blow, each clash of their weapons igniting the storm around them, sending arcs of energy traveling through the air. Suddenly, the king switched forms. For a split second, he was like a ghost, Maximus's swords passing harmlessly through his skeletal form. Then pain. A slash across his chest sent him staggering. His armor held, making the necrotic energy that was meant to eat away at his body had no effect. "You are resilient," the king grinned. "But even the strongest of warriors succumb to death." Maximus smirked, wiping blood from his lips. "Guess I'll just have to be the exception." With that, he charged the king, this time with magic flowing through every inch of his body. He created a magic whip, using it to latch onto the undead king's sword. Using the whip, he began to consume the energy from the king's sword and transfer it to his own swords. The king noticed this and cut the whip, but not before Maximus managed to consume a lot of the necrotic energy that the sword had. Drawing the king in, Maximus predicted his move and managed to dodge, then counterattacked with one of his swords, tearing through the armor of the king and the other slicing through the curse bone. The undead king staggered, but only for a moment. Then, an explosion of dark energy erupted from his body, blasting Maximus back. Enough! The storm itself seemed to roar in response as the king raised his sword. The sky split open, and from the heavens, a barrage of cursed spears descended toward Maximus. Each one carried enough power to erase entire armies. Maximus had no time to think. He quickly moved. He sprinted through the battlefield, dodging, weaving between the falling spears as they detonated around him, leaving gaping voids where reality itself had been erased. He leapt onto a crumbling rock, then higher, using his magic to form platforms in midair. His target, the undead king, who hovered above, gathering power for another strike. Maximus kept leaping upward, propelling himself like a comet. The king swung his sword, but Maximus dodged mid-air at the last second, narrowly evading the deadly swing. And then he struck. Dawn's Here and Duskfang pierced the king's chest, the combined force of light and darkness colliding against his necrotic form. The undead king let out a ghastly roar as cracks formed across his body, his skeletal form struggling to contain the opposing forces tearing through him. Maximus didn't hesitate as he poured everything he had into one final push, his blades erupting with pure, unrelenting energy. With a final, devastating slash, he ripped the undead king apart, The explosion that followed shook the floating island to its core. The cursed energy dissipated into the winds. The castle trembled before crumbling entirely, its foundation no longer sustained by the dark power that had held it together. As the dust settled, Maximus stood amidst the ruins, breathing heavily, his sword still glowing faintly in his hands. The undead king was gone. The third trial was over, and he won. For his final trial, he was thrown into a subterranean maze filled with tunnels, rock golems, and earthquakes. The descent was brutal. Maximus barely had time to catch his breath from his fight with the undead king before the ground beneath him split apart, dragging him into the depths of the earth. He crashed into a solid rock, rolling across the floor before coming to a stop. The dust from his surroundings filled his lungs as he pushed himself to his feet, surveying his surroundings. The cavern stretched endlessly with tunnels going in every direction. The walls had a faint, eerie glow with lines of molten rock running through the stone. As he was looking at his surroundings, the ground shook. A loud boom echoed through the cavern, followed by a distant sound of grinding stone. Maximus grabbed both Dawn's Ear and Duskfang to prepare for whatever was coming. He stepped forward cautiously, navigating the labyrinthine paths, each one seemingly identical to the last. The deeper he went, the more unstable the tunnels became. Every few steps, the ground would rumble violently, sometimes collapsing the passage behind him. He had no choice but to keep moving. From the cavern walls, massive figures began to take shape, gargantuan golems of stone and crystal, their bodies forged from the very elements of the cave. Their eyes burned with molten cores as they turned their gaze toward him. These were the rock golems of the cave. The first one lunged at him, a colossal fist swinging in a downward arc. Maximus rolled to the side, just in time, avoiding using his magic. The impact sent shockwaves through the cavern, shattering the stone floor. Because of its size and slow speed, the golem's hand was still in the floor, which Maximus took advantage of, slashing at the golem's arm with Dawn's Ear. The magic-infused blade bit into the rock, but barely left a mark. The golem swung again, forcing Maximus to leap back, his mind racing. Blades alone wouldn't work on these, he needed something stronger. Summoning his magic, he used the disintegrate ability on the golem, causing the golem's body to disintegrate starting from its legs. Within seconds, the golem was completely gone, leaving nothing behind. But this wasn't the only golem, as more started to emerge from the walls. Not only that, but the quake started to grow stronger, making the entire labyrinth become more unstable. Maximus ran, weaving through the collapsing tunnels, dodging falling boulders, and weaving through the large groups of golems. He struck where he could cast Disintegrate on various of the golems. He didn't destroy all of them, as he needed to conserve what remaining stamina he had to cast magic. As he was running, the ground suddenly slit open beneath, causing him to fall. Before he could try and save himself, a massive boulder had smashed into him, pushing him even further down in the darkness. The magic fatigue was starting to catch up with him. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a blinding flash, an explosion of light and heat as he hit the ground hard. The boulder didn't kill him, thankfully, as he reinforced his body upon initial impact. He grunted as he mustered up the strength to move the boulder off of him. For a few minutes, he lay there on the ground, taking a break for a short time before he had to keep moving to wherever it was he had to go. Standing up, he looked around and found himself in a massive cavern. At its center stood a humanoid figure standing in front of a golem who was more massive than the previous ones. Maximus readied himself, knowing that this was the final battle that he would need to win before he finished all of his trials. Towering before him was the Golem King, a monolithic figure clad in stone armor reinforced with magic. Arcane symbols glowed across its body. The colossal golem beside it stood motionless, its glowing eyes locked onto Maximus, waiting for a command. "You have come far, warrior, but this is as far as you will go. You have killed many of my underlings, which is unacceptable, and now you will pay," the Golem King said as it waved its hand, causing the ground to tremble. From the shadows, smaller golems different from the ones he encountered before burst forth, some humanoid, other crawling like beasts of stone and crystal. Maximus exhaled, steadying his breathing and pushing past his fatigue. "Just one more battle," he muttered as the first wave of golems charged. Maximus weaved through them with his speed, slashing and disintegrating a few of them. Dawn's here carved scars into the stone bodies, while Duskfang deflected, crushing a few attacks directed towards him. But for every golem he felled, more replaced them, their bodies reforming from the cavern walls. Then, the Golem King raised its hand, sending forth the massive golem standing at his side. Its hand swung toward Maximus, who barely managed to leap away before the golem's hand smashed into the ground, creating a crater and sending debris flying. The force sent not just him, but the other golems tumbling as well. He managed to regain his balance and slammed his hand against the ground, causing the entire cavern to shake. Cracks appeared in the wall, and small to medium-sized rocks began to fall from the ceiling. The Golem King narrowed its eyes. "Fool," it shouted. "You think to bury me? I am a mountain itself." The colossal golem raised both fists, slamming them into the ground. A shockwave of magic erupted from the impact, nullifying Maximus's magic and stabilizing the cavern. The Golem King was just a summoner. It was tied to the very foundation of a labyrinth. In order to win this swiftly before he collapsed due to magic fatigue, he would need to use his most powerful technique. It was a magic technique that Ianwi taught him, which used every ounce of his remaining magic and reinforced his body and enhanced his strength x10. The technique would last 2 minutes, and after the 2 minutes, the magic fatigue would take over and he would collapse almost immediately. Activating the technique, all of Maximus's remaining magic enveloped his entire body almost instantly. The Golem King, sensing the concentration of magic power, commanded its mini golems to swarm Maximus. But with a swing of Dawn's here, he sliced through every golem before sprinting towards the colossal golem. The colossal golem swung its massive arm in a wide arc, aiming to crush Maximus in a single blow. But with his increased speed and strength, Maximus launched himself into the air, twisting midair to evade the strike. The sheer force of the golem's swing sent shockwaves through the cavern, shattering stone formations. Maximus landed atop the golem's arm and sprinted up along its arm. The colossal golem roared as it attempted to shake him off. Chunks of stone broke beneath his feet as he pushed forward, leaping onto the golem's chest. With one downward swing, he split the colossal golem in half from head to toe. Its core was destroyed in the process, but to make sure that it was destroyed, he also used disintegrate on its body. After a few seconds, the golem was reduced to nothing. The Golem King, seeing this, vanished from his spot and appeared right next to Maximus, delivering a powerful strike to his abdomen. But Maximus sensed this attack coming and managed to grab his stone fist just before it hit his body. Maximus crushed the stone fist, then spun and delivered a blow with Dawn's here, slicing deep into the Golem King's body. But this wasn't enough, as the Golem King's hand regenerated almost instantly. They exchanged blows for about half a minute, with the Golem King mainly being the defensive the entire time. He had to fend off against dual swords and various magic attacks launched by Maximus, while trying to land an effective attack of his own. Maximus observed the Golem King's struggle and noted a subtle change in the arcane symbols illuminating his body. The glow was subtly decreasing, which likely indicated that his magic energy was depleting. The consistent regeneration hacks seemed to be draining him. Maximus needed to strike at those magic cores, preventing the Golem King from recharging his energy. As the fight went on, he felt that he was reaching his time limit, so he pulled one final move. Drawing the Golem King in for a feint, he grabbed one of his arms, causing the Golem King to try and counter with a spin. As he spinned, Maximus used both Dawn's here and Duskfang and swung in an X pattern across the Golem King's body. His entire top half was gone and had fallen to the ground. Maximus then took Duskfang and drove it into the bottom half of the Golem King's body, shattering the magic which held it together. Unlike limbs, the Golem King's body could not regenerate as fast as an arm or leg could. Because of this, it was rendered immovable and couldn't do anything to fight back. Maximus stood over the crumbling remains of the Golem King, his breath ragged, his body barely holding together. The last bit of magic faded from his body, and he felt the crushing weight of exhaustion settle in. His 2-minute limit had passed, causing him to collapse on the ground. All of the golems under the Golem King had shattered as the Golem King's magic faded. His vision went black, and the last thing he saw was the caver crumbling above him. Without its master, the magic holding it together unraveled. The final trial was over. He had successfully survived all 4 trials. Waking up, Maximus found himself in a familiar place. It was the original cave that he entered before being forcefully teleported to his first trial. As his eyes adjusted itself, he noticed 3 figures standing in front of him. He recognized all 3 of them as the goddess, the great stallion, and Mother Royne. Congratulations, Maximus. You have successfully passed the trials and are now eligible to become a demigod now, said the goddess. Yes, congratulations indeed. As expected from a mortal, we gave our blessing, voiced the great stallion. I'm glad that steward I appointed has been able to achieve something great, said Mother Royne as she smiled at him. Thank you for blessings. If not for the 3 blessings from each of you, I don't know if I would have lasted as long as I did. Maximus replied, all of this would never have been possible if not for them. The goddess smiled, glad that her choice to give him a new life turned out to be quite entertaining and allowed him to do what he wanted. She had seen many people. She gave another chance, took what she gave them, and used it for evil. Only a few used it for either good things or to simply just for survival and power. Power can be achieved without turning to evil things. It just took a very strong person not to go down that path. You have shown great courage and determination, she said. But now, the real battle will begin in 2 years. The Lord of Light, or Lawler, has been amassing his forces in the old ruins of Valyria in order to get rid of you. By now, he is well over 500k demons amassed within Valyria and will begin his attack against you in 298 AC. She explained, however, now that you will be granted the powers of a demigod, you will be able to stand against him in his mortal form. Maximus was a little confused after she said mortal form. What do you mean by mortal form? He asked. Similar to all gods and goddess, we can all manifest ourselves in either mortal or spiritual forms. Our mortal forms allow us to interfere in the world of man and influence it should it pique our interests, while our spiritual forms can in any way interfere with the mortal world, yet it is the only form that allows us to use our full powers. Maximus nodded, understanding the difference between the 2 forms, and began forming an idea of what she was getting at. Because he is in his mortal form, he is only able to wield his abilities at a demigod level. And thanks to your completion of the trials, you can now contend with him in a fight. But just because his powers are restricted doesn't mean he isn't more powerful than you are. His experience and knowledge far outweigh your own. You will be a newly minted demigod, and he has existed since the birth of time itself, the great stallion added. Do not go charging into battle against him with arrogance or bravado. Mother Royne, her voice calm and comforting, spoke up next. Remember, Maximus, even the strongest of currents can be redirected by a single stone. You must be that stone. Use your wits and strategy to outmaneuver Lawler. It is not only strength and power that wins wars, but cunning and strategy. He knew this, but they probably emphasized it because they probably saw this mistake happen many times before. The 3 of them stepped closer to Maximus and placed their hand on his body. He closed his eyes as he experienced a burning pain, as if every nerve in his body was on fire. This was briefly replaced with a cool sensation washing over him. As the sensations faded, Maximus opened his eyes. He felt an immense amount of power coursing through his veins, which made him feel invincible. The goddess stepped back, her fingers leaving trails of electric light on his chest. She tilted her head back and let out a sound that would be best described as the music of the heavens. The music spread out in waves, reverberating through the earth and the air. There was something divine and infinitely profound in that sound. It was a song of ice of fire. With one final, harmonious chord, the song ended. The goddess opened her eyes and looked at Maximus. "Now you stand as a demigod?" "Maximus," she said, her voice echoing around the room. "Use your newfound powers wisely." "I will," he answered. With a nod from each of the divine figures, Maximus found himself back at the entrance of the cave. At this time, a system notification popped up. 4 trials to ascend to a demigod completed. New skills/abilities have been added alongside rewards. A new myths section has been unlocked, allowing powerful mythological creatures and abilities to be summoned. Opening his status window, he saw new skills/abilities on top of his old ones. Name: Maximus. House: Invictus. Demigod skills/abilities. Aura of Dominion. A supernatural presence that compels obedience and inspires loyalty or fear in mortals. Oath-binding speech. When the Emperor swears an oath or compels others to, it becomes magically enforced. Breaking it leads to dire consequences. Superhuman strength and stamina. Stronger than any mortal, able to cleave through multiple enemies with a single strike. Immortality. A lifespan far beyond that of normal men. Unyielding will. Mental resilience against mind control, illusions, and emotional manipulation. Battlefield omniscience. A divine awareness of troop movements, terrain advantages, and enemy weaknesses. Unbreakable morale. Armies under their command fight with inhuman courage, resisting fear and exhaustion. Soul reaping. The power to absorb the life force of defeated enemies to grow stronger. Imperial blessings. The Emperor can bless crops, ensure bountiful harvests, and heal the sick with a touch. The Emperor's resurrection. If slain, they are reborn from fire, ice, or blood under specific conditions. Next, he selected the rewards that he got. Quest completed. Complete the demigod trials. Rewards. Minus 200 Guardians. Minus 100 Valkyrie led by Brunhilde. Hela, goddess of death, princess of Asgard, daughter of Odin, is a powerful Asgardian goddess from the Marvel Universe. Due to her status as a goddess, her powers and abilities have been restricted to a demigoddess level, though she is still a very powerful warrior. Maximus almost couldn't believe it. Not only was he given 300 immortal warriors, but he was now able to buy them from the system shop. Then there was the person he summoned, Hela, the goddess of death, and from his memory, a very problematic person in the Marvel Universe. He wondered how she would act once he actually summoned her, if she would be as troublesome as she'd been in the Marvel Universe. Still, at a demigoddess level, her power would be a valuable asset for the battle ahead. Luckily, the system made the people loyal at the start, but he still needed to watch out for she develops over time. Clicking the summon button, he saw a white light shine in front of him for a few seconds before Hela was standing before him. The formidable goddess of death was clad in her usual green and black attire, long dark hair cascading around her figure. Despite her past reputation for chaos, the look in her eyes was soft towards him. Her lips curled into a small smile before she spoke. She said as she bowed her head. "It is an honor to meet you, Your Excellency." "Please, raise your head, Hela," he said as she raised her head. "I'm glad to have such another powerful person, such as yourself, at my side." As he finished speaking, he heard a familiar sound above them. It was the sound of one of his dragons, descending upon their position. Hela created a blade in her hand, ready to attack. Maximus quickly reached his hand out. "Calm down, Hela. They're under me," he explained. She put away her weapon. "I'm sorry, Your Excellency. I thought they were potential enemies," she stated. Seconds later, the dragons landed, and their riders pulled the same thing as Hela. After ordering them to stand down and explaining the situation, they hopped on one of the dragons and proceeded west to Heaven's Reach. It was a 20-hour ride to Heaven's Reach, but Maximus was hungry from fighting for so long, so he decided to stop at V's Dothrak and eat something before heading to Heaven's Reach. Arriving at V's Dothrak, he was impressed by how much the city had changed. More than 1 million people lived within the city. Many of them were the Dothraki, as it was their homeland, and the city is a symbol of their ancient heritage. The city was pretty much kept the same as before except for a few improvements to its infrastructure and overall improvement of the material that the houses were built with. The old hall, which used to house the calls of the Dothraki, had been rebuilt into a small residence for Maximus when he visited the city. Landing within the dedicated landing zone for the dragons and wyverns, Maximus and Hela descended from the dragon's back and approached the residence. A crowd began to gather around to welcome their beloved emperor. He waved and smiled as he greeted them, while Hela looked around, surprised at how loved Maximus was with the people. After spending a few minutes with the people, Maximus went into the residence as the staff quickly prepared a meal for him. At Heaven's Reach a few hours later, a raven had arrived, informing Oleron of his success and where he was at the moment. Having received this, he quickly informed the rest of the most powerful people in the Imperial Union and prepared a massive celebration to congratulate him. The people were quickly told about this feat, and rumors had begun to spread overnight about whether or not this information was correct, even if it came from the Chancellor himself. The fervent believers of Maximus believed almost immediately, reinforcing their original belief. The worshippers of the Great Stallion and Mother Royne had gained tens of thousands of more followers overnight. Meanwhile, Maximus had finished eating his food with Hela and went to sleep, wanting to get some rest before returning to Heaven's Reach. What he didn't know was that the news had begun to reach V's Dothrak as the heralds of the Imperial Union started to spread the news throughout every city. The ability to inform the people of changes quickly was something that Maximus wanted to make possible, which is why he created the heralds. Heralds were people who spent most days traveling to different cities and informing the population of new policies, decrees, and maintaining public relations. An informed population is a stable population. Knowledge kept the people content, especially with the rise of literacy for the common people. The next morning, Maximus rose from his bed to find Hela standing in front of the window, looking outside. He was sure that she snuck in and wondered what was doing. "What's going on, Hela?" he asked. Hela remained in her spot as she replied, "There's a great gathering outside. Tens of thousands, possibly more, in front of the residence." Standing up and approaching the window, Maximus saw what she was talking about. A large number of people were gathered in front of the residence, some holding wooden signs. There were children riding on their father's shoulders and elders being supported by their kin. The atmosphere was festive and excitement filled the air. "Seems like the news of my success has spread throughout the empire." He turned towards Hela. "I hope you're good with people," he jokingly stated. She scoffed as she replied, "I'm great with people, Your Excellency. In time, they will come to love me more than even you." Maximus laughed at her words as he got ready. Once he was done, they walked to the entrance of the residence where the Imperial Guards opened the doors. "Your Excellency," one of them greeted, "the city has heard about your ascension and has come to congratulate you. We have formed a perimeter around the residence. Shall we clear a path to the landing area?" Maximus placed his hand on the guard's shoulder. "That won't be needed. Just hold your positions, Captain. I won't need protection today from the people." As much as he wanted to say otherwise, he just bowed his head as Maximus walked past him. Approaching the gate, the guard stood, ready to open it as Maximus and Hela approached. Ordering them open the gate, the crowd went wild upon seeing their emperor. "Long live Emperor Maximus!" they chanted rhythmically, causing a wave of pride to surge through Maximus's heart. He raised his hand, calling for silence. The crowd quieted almost instantly, their adoration turning into eager anticipation. "My people," he called, "I return to you victorious from my trials given to me by the Great Stallion and Mother Royne," he stated. While that wasn't exactly true, his system wasn't something that was known to anybody except him. It was best to continue fabricating the story he had already created decades ago. A deafening roar of cheers erupted from the crowd, shaking the very ground beneath them. Children waved banners, elders shed tears of joy, and warriors pounded their fists against their chests in salute. Hela watched with a smirk, arms crossed, as Maximus basked in the love of his people. "You do know how to work a crowd," she murmured under her breath. Maximus turned slightly toward her, grinning. "It's not work when it's genuine," he said before addressing the people again. After addressing the people, he walked through the crowd all the way to the landing area. But as he was about to hop on one of the dragons, Nyxera had flown overhead, landing directly in front of them. She practically crushed him as she laid her head right on top of him. But with his new strength, he was just fine. Maximus chuckled, patting the side of Nyxera's massive head. "Missed me, did you?" he said. "It has only been a month, but yes," she replied. "A month, Jesus." He didn't know how long he had been gone until now. "But let's not waste time and go to Heaven's Reach as everybody is waiting for you," she stated as Maximus hopped on top of her. Meanwhile, Hela simply stared at Nyxera, curious about this massive dragon. "Oh, Hela, this is Nyxera, my personal companion and the mother of all the other dragons." "Nyxera," Hela repeated the name. "Pleasure to meet you." Nyxera tilted her head, examining Hela. She didn't find anything particularly bad in her, nor did she sense any bad intentions. "Likewise," she replied. Maximus helped Hela onto Nyxera's back, then took off to the sky, followed by the other dragon riders. By the time they arrived, the capital was already in a frenzy of celebration. The entire city had gathered to witness his return. Every street was lined with banners bearing his sigil. Flowers petals rained from balconies, and thousands of imperial guards formed ceremonial lines along the streets leading to the palace. As Nyxera descended, trumpets started to play alongside the announcement of his arrival. He stopped just outside of the eastern gate and proceeded to walk on foot through the city. Olerin, Ianwe, Lilith, Merlin, Faraday, and all the other members of the High Council were waiting in front of the palace for his arrival. It took him almost 2 hours to walk through the streets and reach the palace as the people tried to garner his attention. Once he reached one of the entrances of the palace, he stopped, turning around to face the people who had gathered in front of the palace. Today was a special day for the Empire, as not only has he become a demigod, but now he had the ability to stand against the forces of Lawler, and that was the direction that his empire would take. He raised his hands, causing the people to quiet down. "We stand at the dawn of a new age," he declared. "With my ascension, we now stand much stronger than ever. Those who stand against us get weaker with each passing year. Soon enough, there'll be nobody to stand against us." The crowd erupted into another wave of cheers. The sheer volume of their voices could be heard for miles. Maximus let the excitement settle before raising his hand once more, bringing silence back. "But let's not pretend this journey was easy," he continued. "In fact, if I had a gold coin for every time I nearly died, well, let's say I'd be wealthier than I already am." A wave of laughter spread through the crowd. While it may not be true how many times he almost died, he wanted to keep the calm atmosphere within the crowd. "Soon enough, we will march upon Lawler and his demonic forces before he is able to attack any citizen of the Imperial Union. The battle will happen in about 18 months, and it will be a devastating battle that will cost a lot of lives. But if we don't do it, then we will be invaded and many more people will die as a result." He explained as the crowd, instead of going silent, a few people started shouting, "Where do I sign up? And let's send these demons back to hell with their god." Soon enough, the entire crowd joined in, filled with immense patriotism for the Empire. Millions of people had better lives because of the Empire, and they were prepared to fight and die for it. "Good," shouted Maximus. "We will send them crawling back to the depths of hell as we fight to secure our future." And with that round of applause, he raised his voice even higher. "We will protect our land, our people, our future." The people raised their fists into the air, prepared for the battle ahead. In their heads, a lot of them planned to work even harder for this battle. One didn't have to join to win. They could support the war effort in other ways as well. Maximus turned slightly toward Hela, who was standing beside him, arms still crossed but with the faintest hint of a smirk. "As you can see," he murmured, "I am well loved by the people." Hela rolled her eyes. Yes, yes. Emperor of the people, loved by all," she teased. "Just don't get so full of yourself that your head outgrows your crown." Maximus chuckled. "It's custom-made. It'll fit, don't worry." The celebration continued, and soon a massive feast was prepared in the grand hall of the palace. The tables overflowed with roasted meat, fresh fruits, and enough wine to drown a small army. As he took his seat at the head of the table, Ian Wee leaned over with a smirk. "So, you're a demigod now," he mused. "Does that mean you'll start glowing? Maybe shoot lightning from your hands?" Maximus took a sip of his wine, grinning. "Not yet, but give me time. I'm working on a good dramatic entrance." The feast carried on into the night, the entire empire celebrating the dawn of a new era of power. The next year and a half were spent preparing for the attack against Lawler and his demonic forces. For the attack, Maximus had browsed the system and purchased tens of thousands of warriors and creatures he thought could be useful for the attack. The first soldiers he summoned were 8,000 Numenorians. The Numenorians are descendants of the men of the West, who came from a fair and noble lineage. They were said to be the tallest among men, with an average height of 6 feet, and had incredible strength. These qualities were not only physical, but their mental fortitude was also commendable. Trained for years in the art of warfare, strategy, and combat, they would be invaluable assets on a battlefield. Next in line were 2,000 Olaghai. Similar to the Uruk-hai in a way, the Olaghai were trolls, bred by the dark powers in Mordor for war. Their resilience, strength, and size would make them the perfect battering rams against Lawler's demonic horde. Following them were the 10,000 Caragors. Beasts from Mordor, these large predatory creatures moved with speed and agility, even with their heavy builds. Their leaps could span great distances, making them ideal for breaching enemy lines and causing chaos among the ranks. The 1,000 sword masters of Hoth were also summoned. Armed with their great swords, these elven warriors from the kingdom of Ulthuan had centuries of experience in battle. Their martial prowess and impenetrable defenses would send the demonic forces running. After this, he moved on to the myth units that he now had access to. The first of the myth units were 20,000 automatons from Age of Mythology. While weak compared to other mythology soldiers, they could be best utilized in large groups and had the advantage of tireless endurance. As artificially created soldiers, they had no need to desist for rest or sustenance. Their unyielding will to fight till the end would make them useful as frontline soldiers or to cover for tired soldiers to retreat. The second group was 10 fire giants from Norse mythology. Towering creatures fueled by wrath and fire, their devastated fire attacks could easily shatter any fortress or groups of enemies. Their incredible strength and resistance would make them almost invincible in combat. Next were 10 colossus, drawn from Greek mythology. Towering giants sculpted of bronze and iron. These lethal behemoths wielded giant swords capable of laying waste to entire enemy formations. Their sheer size alone would act as a demoralizing factor to the adversaries. After buying all of these new summons, Maximus was left with a depressing 16,650 system points. Lucky, he had some powerful people and warriors to use which numbered a little less than 100k. All of these were the soldiers summoned from the system, and each of them was an elite warrior bred for war. To match the 500k demons that they were going to face, 600k Imperial soldiers made up of Dothraki warriors and other non-Dothraki people were trained for these last 18 months to face the demons. Special armor was created by the dwarven craftsmen with runes in the Amor to offer more protection from the demons. The armor was designed to be light, but also extremely resistant to damage and curses. Airships were also created to help transport the 600k Imperial soldiers and provide ground support and reconnaissance. The ships were made of a special type of wood, which was light, yet durable enough to hold countless soldiers and artillery. Integrated with advanced navigation technologies, they would serve as juggernauts alongside the dragons and wyverns of the Imperial Air Force. Now, at the end of the 18-month period, 297 AC, 600k soldiers were posted up at the lands of the Long Summer, which was across the Smoking Sea where Valyria sat. A large fortress was constructed on top of the old city of Orus over the past 18 months to house 1 million soldiers and other support staff. Thanks to efforts by stonemasons and carpenters, The fortress was completed within a year and had been stocked with supplies and weapons for the massive army. The fortress, known henceforth as Maximus Fortress, was filled with willing patriots and hard-trained soldiers ready to risk their lives for the Empire and for Maximus. Everybody present in the fortress were all volunteers, ready to defend imperial land from the demonic forces. As soon as the first day of the first month came 298 AC, the first reported sightings of the demonic forces were seen crossing the smoking sea. It was a few minutes past midnight when the alarm started sounding around the fortress. Maximus was woken up by one of the royal guards and had quickly put on his armor and proceeded outside. With him was Lilith and Hela, who were stationed within his army. Olerin, Ianwe, Merlin, Dane II, Alexander, and Achilles were stationed in various parts of the fortress, leading their own legion. Soldiers rushed to their stations with torches being lit up across the fortress. The first scouts who had spotted the demonic horde on the smoking sea reported thousands of creatures surging across the ruined waters. Maximus stood atop the central keep, fully armored, Lilith and Hela standing behind him, their eyes fixed on the distance where the smoking sea sat. War horns blared across the fortress, a signal that had been drilled into every soldier. The time had come. All men to their posts, several commanders commanded. The enemy has come. The Númenóreans, clad in their armor of blackened steel and gold, formed the first defensive line along the towering walls alongside 60,000 soldiers of the Dawnborn. Forming the second defensive lines as reinforcements were Elven spearmen, Uruk-hai, and Gondor infantry. Behind them stood archers who were already firing at the demonic hordes approaching the walls. Mortars created by the dwarves were moved into position behind the walls, ready to lay waste to the demons once they reached the beachhead. After a few minutes had passed, the first wave struck the walls. At another part of the fortress, a wave of fire erupted as monstrous creatures, some resembling twisted mockeries of men, while others took on grotesque, nightmarish forms, swarmed forward. Their eyes burned with unholy fire, and their voices shrieked with an otherworldly hatred. From the sky, great winged horrors descended alongside demons engulfed in flame. They started attacking the airships patrolling above, engaging the Imperial wyverns and dragons in aerial combat. The Imperial dragon and wyvern riders showed the demons what they had been training for over the past years. The dragon and wyvern riders jumped from each other's mount, while simultaneously killing demons. Meanwhile, the ground forces did not idly stand by. Soldiers of the Dawnborn Legion let fly flaming arrows, transforming the night sky with the scenery of flying flame arrows. The Awakens and Uruk-hai, unafraid of their grotesque opponents, rampaged forward from the walls, their mighty roars echoing across the battlefield. Neither fear nor death deterred them. They were bred for war, and vengeance ran through their blood. Archers, loose, Ianwe commanded from the northern battlements. A rain of arrows, some enchanted, others wrapped in runic fire, rained down upon the advancing demons. Screeches of agony filled the night as the first ranks of the hellish horde collapsed under the onslaught of Imperial forces. The Númenóreans braced themselves as the first demons reached the walls. Infernal siege creatures, massive beasts with molten cores, slammed their bodies against the reinforced gates, shaking the fortress to its foundation. "Release the Caragors," Dane II roared. The iron gates opened momentarily, allowing a surge of 10,000 Caragors to spill forth. The demonic beasts barely had time to react before the war-trained creatures pounced upon them, tearing flesh and bone. A savage melee erupted at the base of the fortress walls, where fangs and claw met sword and flame. From atop the walls, the sword masters of Hoth descended, leaping from the battlements into the enemy ranks below. Their great swords, glowing with enchantments of speed and sharpness, carved through demon and beast alike. Still, for every enemy slain, another took its place. Reinforcements were still arriving from various parts of the fortress, and it was their job to hold them off until they did. The automaton units moved in next, unrelenting and tireless, their blades carving through demonic flesh. They held the lines where human soldiers faltered, ensuring that the walls did not fall to the first wave. Then the fire giants joined the battle. Their enormous forms loomed over the battlefield, each footstep shaking the ground. With a roar that echoed through the night, they unleashed waves of fireballs, incinerating hundreds at once. The demonic horde faltered from the attacks, but the fire only fueled the hatred of some infernal creatures, who hurled themselves forward in suicidal fury. From the sea, Admiral Thorne commanded the 800 ships, which formed a perimeter around the region, blocking any demonic creature from escaping through the sea. With her were a few dozen witches as support, and a few wyvern riders flying above to fight the aerial demonic creatures. The fight against the demonic horde had begun, and so far they had been holding on, but who knows how long that would last. They would need to eventually transition from the defensive to the offensive in order to win the battle. Despite the relentless defense, the demons continued their advance. They brought forth monstrous siege engines, structures made from blackened iron and flesh. These abominations crawled toward the fortress, carried by legions of lesser demons. With a loud boom, one of the walls trembled as a massive battering beast slammed into it. The Númenóreans holding the walls braced themselves as the magic-reinforced walls held against the beast's attack. All forces outside of the wall had already retreated back behind the safety of the walls while all of this was going on. Swooping down from above, wyverns and their riders had done a fly-by on the battering beast, making them roar in pain as it was enveloped in wyvern fire. With this, Merlin stepped forward and began to rain down fireballs, lightning bolts, and other magic attacks against the demons on the battlefield. The witches under her joined in and began to kill hundreds of demons by the minute. However, a few of the siege engines from demons were operational. The officers in charge of the mortars shouted orders as the crew changed the trajectory to now target the siege engines. Boom! The sound of mortar fire sounded throughout the fortress, the walls shaking with each shot. The demons roared with fury as they were cut down, their siege engines blasted apart by the Imperial mortar teams. But, from the sea, more demons kept coming in waves after waves. In another part of the fortress, Alexander and Achilles led their men to defend a breach in the fortress wall. A powerful demon wielding strange magic had launched a massive attack against a section of the wall, shattering it and killing a few hundred soldiers in the process. The Gondor infantry, Dawnborn spearmen, and Dothraki archers were all working together as one to repel the attack. The Gondor infantry made up the second line, with the Dawnborn spearmen holding the front line with their shields and spears. Behind them, the Dothraki archers fired into the horde of demons, taking out hundreds with each volley of arrows. Carriers ran back and forth, bringing boxes of arrows so that the archers could have a constant supply of ammo. Alexander rode on his horse Bucephalus and cleaved a path through the demonic horde with his spear, while Achilles fought amidst his myrmidons alongside the Dawnborn. Their swords, spears, and shields moved in unison, a testament to their years of training. Achilles, clad in his black armor, fought like a force of nature. Each slash of his blade severed limbs, decapitated demons, and left only carnage in his path. His myrmidons matched his fury, cutting through the lesser demons. Alexander, atop Bucephalus, commanded his forces with tactical brilliance and personal ferocity. He parried a demon's flaming whip, twisting in the saddle before thrusting his spear through its heart. "Hold the line. Do not falter," he roared, rallying his men. The breach in the wall continued to widen as more demons poured through. If they were not stopped soon, the integrity of the fortress would be compromised. In the air, Nixon and Nixina, the two children of Nixera, had joined the battle. The first thing they saw was the breach on the wall, causing them to head in that direction first. Once they arrived, they wasted no time making their presence known. Nixon unleashed a powerful ball of dark magic towards the horde of demons that had gathered. Unlike the wyverns, Nixera and her children possessed abilities beyond a dragon's breath. Nixon's attack landed at the very heart of the horde, annihilating thousands instantly. The demons' bodies disintegrated on impact, leaving nothing but scorched earth. Nyxina soared over the ocean, unleashing waves of dark magic upon the demons, attempting to cross. Within minutes, the breach in the wall had been cleared of all enemies. Seizing the opportunity, Alexander ordered his men to seal the gap, forming a makeshift barricade to reinforce the fortress's defenses. Out at sea, Nyxina had eradicated the remaining demons, attempting to advance by water. A tense silence fell over this part of the battlefield as the invasion from the ocean ceased. However, the same could not be said for the rest of the fortress. High above the central stronghold, Maximus rode atop Nyxina, surveying the chaos below. Flying in formation, alongside them were 50 wyverns and 100 valkyries, led by Brunhilde on their steeds. Their destination lay ahead, the ruins of Tyria, situated beyond the smoking sea. Once a great city, Tyria had now been transformed into a demonic stronghold, serving as the enemy's first line of defense before they could march on Valyria. Maximus suspected that Lawler himself awaited them beyond those ruined walls. Below, the battle was coming to a close. The demons' numbers were dwindling rapidly. Soon, the transport ships would move in, ferrying soldiers across the sea to claim Tyria. However, to prevent catastrophic losses before the ships even reached the shore, Maximus intended to establish a foothold on the island first. As Tyria came into view, groups of winged demons darkened the sky, preparing to intercept them. But against 50 wyverns, Nyxina, and 100 valkyries, they posed little threat. Maximus turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder at Hela, who sat behind him. "I'll leave the fortress to you," he said. Without hesitation, Hela teleported directly into the heart of the fortress. Maximus remained atop Nyxina, watching the battle unfold. This would be the first time he witnessed Hela in action, and given her formidable abilities, wiping out an entire stronghold of demons would likely be little more than a warm-up. He turned to face Hela, who was sitting behind him. "I'll leave the fortress to you," he said as Hela teleported straight into the middle of the fortress. Maximus stayed on top of Nyxina's back, watching the battle unfold before him. This was the first time that he would see Hela in action, and considering her abilities, taking down an entire fortress of demons was nothing. Hela landed in the heart of the fortress, alerting the nearby demons to her presence. The air around her was filled with deathly energy as the demons turned to face her, their snarls echoing through the ruined stronghold. Towering behemoths of molten stone and shadowed steel, grotesque abominations sewn together from the corpses of lesser beings, and entire battalions of heavily armored demons stood between her and the demon commander in charge of the fortress. With a smirk on her face, Hela raised her hands as black blades erupted from the ground like a field of thorns, skewering hundreds of demons in an instant. The fortress trembled as her magic spread through the battlefield, black spikes impaling siege engines and shredding demonic war machines to pieces. The demons roared and charged her all at once. A massive, horned beast wielding a hammer the size of a war chariot swung down at her. She caught the blow with one hand, the ground barely breaking beneath her, before she shattered the weapon into dust. With a flick of her hand, a dozen necrotic swords formed in the air, piercing through the beast's skull. From the skies, winged demons dove toward her. With a single motion, Hela conjured a ton of obsidian blades, cutting them down mid-flight. Their corpses rained from the sky as she turned to the next wave of attackers. A massive flesh colossus, its body filled with demonic power, lumbered toward her, its grotesque mouths chanting dark incantations. Hela's eyes shined, and with a wave of her arm, chains of shadow wrapped around the beast, constricting tighter and tighter until it collapsed in on itself. That's when the ground shook. A massive figure emerged from the center of the fortress, a towering demon clad in armor, his eyes burning with malevolent fire. A massive, barbed greatsword rested on his shoulders, radiating an aura of pure destruction. "So, the enemy have finally arrived," the demon said, With the power granted to me by the Lord of Light, I will vanquish you and the rest of the mortals from this world. You stand alone against my legions. You will fall, just like all the others across the sea." Hela tilted her head, confused. Legions. She gestured to the battlefield, where thousands of demonic corpses littered the ground, the fortress now silent aside from the crackling of distant flames. The demons snarled. No matter. They were all pawns who served a much greater purpose. Their deaths mean nothing in the grand scheme of my lord's plans. I shall end you myself. Without hesitation, he swung his greatsword. Hela merely sidestepped. Her expression was one of utter boredom. Then when she saw an opening, she struck. Black chains shot from the ground, wrapping around the demon's limbs. He roared, shattering them with sheer strength, but Hela was already moving, closing the distance between them. Her necrotic blades formed in her hands, and in a single motion, she slashed across the demon's chest. The impact sent the demon crashing into the fortress walls. He rose, growling, molten blood leaking from the wound. "You dare!" Hela didn't let him finish. She launched forward, her blades aimed straight at the demon. Each strike was precise, each movement a blur. The demon tried to counter, but she was too fast, too ruthless. Every swing of his greatsword met only air as Hela weaved through his attacks, cutting deeper and deeper into his armor. Finally, with a final devastation strike, Hela plunged a massive blade straight through his chest. The demon gasped, looking down in disbelief as his body began to wither, his power draining into the black abyss of her magic. With one last smirk, Hela twisted the blade. The demon let out a final roar before his body collapsed into dust, his soul consumed by demigoddess of death. As silence settled over the battlefield, Hela surveyed the ruins of the demon stronghold. She stretched and yawned as the battle had ended before she could have a little but more fun. From above, Maximus had already finished dealing with the winged demons and was watching the battle. He was glad that Hela was on their side, as she had some very problematic abilities for anybody who was going against her. With the fortress taken, Maximus sent a messenger to tell the soldiers it was safe to cross. Hundreds of ships moved in, and dozens of airships began transporting the legions to their assigned location. The army was split up into 3 different legions. The first legion was led by Alexander and Achilles, who would head to the Western Islands to eliminate the demons' occupation of the islands. The second legion led by Olerin and Dane II, who would head to the Eastern Islands, eliminating the demons from occupying the islands. The third legion, joined by Merlin and Lilith, would join up with Maximus at Tyrian to establish a base and rest for 3 days before launching a combined assault on Valyria with all 3 legions. The 3 days would be used to allow the 2 other legions to conquer the islands surrounding Valyria and rest for the final battle. On the sea, Admiral Thorne had been defending against aerial and sea demons for the past few hours since the battle started. Admiral Thorne stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Imperial Fury, surrounded by the vast Imperial fleet. 800 ships of the line encircled the island, their cannons blazing as they repelled wave after wave of demonic attackers. Smoke and fire filled the air as demonic creatures attempted to break through the naval blockade, but Thorne and her officers met them with iron and cannons. "Reload all batteries. Keep them off our flanks," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos of battle. Her officers relayed her commands, and within seconds, another devastating volley erupted from the warships, tearing through the grotesque forms of demonic sea beasts attempting to breach their lines. Above them, monstrous flying demons with jagged wings and burning eyes swooped down, shrieking as they descended upon the fleet. Harpoon guns and ballistae, manned by expert gunners, fired at the creatures, impaling them mid-flight and sending their bodies plunging into the sea. From the decks, Imperial archers and mages unleashed their attacks. Arrows tipped with explosive runes found their targets, detonating on impact and reducing demons to smoldering husks. Battle mages cast powerful spells, summoning wind to throw winged demons off balance, and conjuring torrents of fire that turned the sky into an inferno. A group of larger sea demons, each the size of a galleon, surged forward, their monstrous forms breaking through the waves. They slammed into the hulls of the outermost warships, attempting to capsize them. Thorn narrowed her eyes and turned to her officers. Signal the Stormbreaker and Thunder's Wrath. Deploy depth charges. The depth charges were just steel canisters filed with TNT. The two designated warships swiftly maneuvered into position. With a series of deep booms, heavy explosives were launched into the water. Moments later, the sea shook violently as the charges detonated beneath the monstrous attackers. The beasts shrieked and trembled before their bodies were torn apart by the concussive force. Despite their efforts, the demonic fleet showed no signs of relenting. More creatures emerged from the abyss, accompanied by cursed vessels, ships of blackened bone and metal, their hulls adorned with screaming, tormented souls. These vessels, manned by the damned, sailed forth, attempting to break the Imperial blockade. Fire the Hellfire rounds. Sink those abominations. Thorn ordered. The Iron Vow and its surrounding warships adjusted their cannons. With a series of thunderous roars, projectiles streaked across the sky, striking the cursed ships. The vessels erupted into flames, the unholy energies within them combusting in a series of violent explosions. But the enemy still had more horrors to unleash. A massive, hulking form rose from the depths, a sea demon of titanic proportions, covered in jagged armor and dripping with dark energy. Its maw opened, revealing rows of serrated teeth large enough to bite a warship in half. As it emerged, the waters around it turned into a maelstrom, dragging Imperial vessels toward its gaping mouth. Thorn gritted her teeth. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Focus fire on that thing. The fleet sprang into action. Cannons shot, harpoons were launched, and battle mages focused their most powerful spells. The creature screeched as barges of cannon fire blasted into its armor. Still, it pressed forward undeterred. Then, from above, Nixina descended. Her dark form sliced through the air, her glowing eyes locked onto the beast. With a guttural roar, she unleashed a wave of dark magic, striking the sea demon with unrelenting force. The beast thrashed violently as its life force was drained, its body withering beneath Nixina's power. Within moments, it let out one final, echoing shriek before collapsing back into the abyss. Thorn exhaled sharply, but there was no time to celebrate. More demonic vessels approached from the horizon. However, the tide was turning. With Nixina's arrival and the fleet's steadfast defense, the blockade would hold. She turned to her officers. Signal the main fleet. We hold the line at all costs. As the battle raged on, the sea burned with the wreckage of fallen demons, and the Imperial fleet stood firm, ensuring that no demon would leave the region and spread to the rest of the world. With the naval battle securing the blockade, the legions of the Empire landed upon the shores of Tyria, a city long since corrupted by the demonic presence. The First Legion, led by Alexander and Achilles, stormed the Western Islands, cutting down hordes of demons in brutal combat. The Myrmidons and Dawnborn spearmen formed unbreakable phalanxes, their shields and spears driving deep into the enemy ranks, while Dothraki archers rained fire from the rooftops. The Second Legion, under Olerin and Dane II, advanced from the eastern shores, engaging towering infernal war machines and demonic constructs. The Dwarven engineers worked swiftly, rigging explosive charges to weaken the structures, while the Blackguard of Nagorond used their ethereal blades to carve through the monstrosities. Meanwhile, Maximus and the Third Legion, reinforced by Merlin and Lilith, defended the city of Tyria. Wyverns and Valkyries dominated the skies, battling winged horrors that sought to retake the demonic stronghold. Maximus, atop Nyxera, led devastating aerial assaults, his twin blades carving through demonic generals as Nyxera's dark flames engulfed entire battalions. On the ground, Merlin's magic split the earth, sending waves of arcane energy that incinerated anything in their path. Lilith, wielding forbidden sorcery, summoned ethereal warriors that struck terror into the hearts of the demonic horde. The battle raged for hours, but as the sun began to set, Tyria's defenses held strong. The imperial forces stood victorious, though at great cost. The ruins of the city would serve as a staging ground for the final assault on Valyria. With Tyria secured, the three legions rested and reinforced their ranks. For 3 days, healers tended to the wounded, blacksmiths repaired weapons, and commanders devised their strategies. The final battle was near. Scouts reported that Valyria itself had become a fortress of the damned, its historically grand walls now covered in writhing flesh and veins of infernal energy. Lawlor's forces had gathered in full strength, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. On the eve of the march, Maximus stood before his gathered warriors. Tomorrow, we face the source of this darkness. We do not fight for conquest, nor for glory. We fight to reclaim this place from the abyss. The fate of all hangs in the balance. A roar of approval surged through the ranks. The final battle was at hand. The sky above Valyria burned with crimson fire as the three legions advanced. Demonic war horns echoed through the ruins, and the air was filled with the scent of brimstone and death. The battlefield was unlike any other. Valyria's once proud streets were now rivers of molten rock, its towering structures fused with flesh, breathing like living entities. From atop the blackened walls, R'hllor's demonic horde shrieked and howled, awaiting the slaughter. Maximus led the charge, his twin blades in hand infused with his new demigod power. Behind him, the imperial legions charged forward, clashing against the demonic army. The battle erupted into screams, steel, and dark sorcery. Achilles and Alexander led their warriors through the western flank, cutting through twisted abominations with brutal efficiency. Achilles danced through the battlefield, his spear a blur of death, while Alexander's tactical precision ensured every maneuver was executed to perfection. The Myrmidons and Dawnborn cut a bloody swath through demonic champions, while Dothraki horsemen trampled the grotesque spawn beneath their hoofs. Olerin and Dane, too, fought at the eastern front, where demonic siege engines rained hellfire upon the advancing troops. Dwarven war machines retaliated with explosive payloads, bringing down the monstrous constructs. Olerin's staff blazed with fire, burning away the darkness, while Dane led his ironclad dwarven brothers into the thick of battle, axes cleaving demon and fiend alike. In the skies, Nyxina and the Valkyries battled winged horrors, their celestial lances piercing through leathery wings and setting the creatures ablaze. Wyverns and drakes clashed in aerial duels, their roars shaking the battlefield below. The very heavens were a storm of divine and infernal energies. At the heart of the battle, Maximus pressed forward, carving his way toward the great obsidian temple where R'hllor awaited. He cut through waves of demons, his demigod powers making him unstoppable. With a mere swing of his sword, he vaporized dozens of enemies. His footsteps shattered the ground beneath him, and his mere presence sent weaker fiends fleeing in terror. As he reached the temple steps, the earth trembled. The doors parted, and from within, R'hllor emerged. The dark god stood tall, wreathed in fire and shadow, his crimson eyes burning with malice. His form was monstrous, shifting between solid and ethereal, a living being of rage and destruction. So, the mortal who defies the divine has finally come, R'hllor stated. You are nothing before me. Maximus did not waste time with petty dialogue. He launched himself forward, his blades striking against R'hllor's burning form. The impact sent shockwaves across the battlefield. R'hllor retaliated with a blast of hellfire, but Maximus absorbed the flames, his demigod body negating the weakened dark god's power. He countered with a strike that tore through R'hllor's chest, sending divine energy ripping through his form. The battle between them was cataclysmic. Every strike shattered the area around them. Every clash of steel and fire sent shockwaves through the battlefield. R'hllor summoned chains of molten fire, attempting to bind Maximus, but he shattered them with sheer force. With each wound inflicted upon the dark god, the sky above flickered. Drawing upon the last of his power, Lawler attempted to unleash an apocalyptic surge of fire, aiming to incinerate everything in existence. But Maximus, channeling the full might of his power, thrust his twin blades forward, piercing the god's core. A deafening explosion of light and darkness erupted as Lawler's form began to break apart, his essence unraveling. "You are no god," Maximus said as he drove his blades deeper, "and this world will never be yours." With a final cry of defiance, Lawler's body was consumed in an explosion, his essence torn apart. The dark god was no more. As the battlefield fell silent, the demonic army lost its cohesion, their master's destruction shattering their will. The imperial legions, seeing their moment, pressed the attack. The demons, now leaderless, were annihilated. When the sun finally rose over Valyria, it shone upon a land freed from darkness. The ruins still smoldered, and the scars of war remained, but victory was theirs. Maximus stood atop the temple ruins. He had done what no man had ever done. He had slain a god, or at least the weakened form of a god. He was already told how if Lawler could use his actual god form, that he would stand no chance at all. The war was over. As the legions gathered in the ruined capital, a new dawn began. The empire had triumphed, and the world wouldn't have to worry about an invasion. The war was over, or at least that was what Maximus thought. As his army gathered in the ruined capital city of Valyria, a crack appeared in the sky above. From within, a glow seeped through, casting a light over the ruined capital of Valyria. The gathered legions stood in stunned silence, their victory now cast in doubt. A rumble emanated from beyond the opening, and then came the scream, a sound so loud that it shook even the most hardened warriors to their core. A storm of fire and shadow poured forth as a large number of demons, greater in number and horror than before, spilled into the sky. These were not the remnants of the previous demon army. This was a completely new force summoned by Lawler. They came with twisted forms, nightmarish visages, and an intimidating aura. From the sky, a colossal figure emerged. Larger than before, wreathed in blackened fire, Lawler had returned in his new form. His new form was still a weakened version of his main body, but stronger than it was before. His body was engulfed in an endless fire. His eyes gazed down at Maximus with contempt. "I warned you, mortal." Lawler's voice sounded throughout the area. "I am eternal. You are but a speck of dust that has ruined my plans for the last time." Maximus clenched his fists, preparing for this next battle. When he killed him before, he felt that the battle was too easy, and now he knew why. The imperial legions reformed, their ranks tightening together in formation as the demons landed all around the fortress and charged ferociously at the imperial legions. Achilles and Alexander roared commands to their legion, leading the Myrmidons and Dawnborn into the fray. Olerin channeled his magic, conjuring barriers of light to repel the incoming enemy forces. Dane, too, gathered his dwarven warriors and worked together with the swordmasters of Hoth to form a defensive line. Nyxina and the Valkyries took to the skies once more, aimed towards the aerial demons. Merlin and Lilith unleashed their sorcery, forming defensive walls to block the demons and allow their legions to get into a proper defensive formation. Maximus himself leapt in a battle, his dual swords, Dawn's Here and Duskfang, glowing with black flames. He cut through the demonic horde, his strikes cutting through both flesh and bones. But Lawler was already descending, his form crashing onto the battlefield with the force of a falling asteroid. The ground split apart beneath him, veins of hellfire spreading like roots, consuming everything in their path. Lawler extended his hand, and the sky itself turned red. Meteoric fire rained from above, crashing into the imperial ranks, reducing entire battalions to ash. Maximus barely evaded a falling attack, rolling to his feet in time to see Lawler striding toward him. "Even with your demigod abilities, you can't be a god," Lawler growled, his form constantly expanding. Your defiance is meaningless, and once I'm done with you, the Lord of Light will be the only thing the world knows." Maximus raised his blades. "I won't allow that to happen." Maximus launched himself toward Lawler, his blades aimed at his head. The impact sent shockwaves through the battlefield as Lawler blocked the attack with his own demonic sword made of nothing but pure fire, and countered with an eruption of hellfire. Maximus absorbed the flames, using them to fuel his own attacks. He used his strength, pushing his sword against Lawler's, forcing him back a few feet. After that, the battle went to another level. They moved at impossible speeds, striking across the battlefield in bursts of light and shadow. Each clash of their blades sent ripples of destruction through Valyria, toppling what little remained of the ruined city. The legions fought beneath them, locked in their own desperate struggle against the demonic forces. Lawler's rage grew. He used his blade of pure fire and slashed through reality, rupturing the air as he swung at Maximus. Maximus dodged, barely escaping the strike which would have probably killed him, and managed to recover quickly. Raising Dawn's here and Duskfang, he swung back, his blades clashing against the fire sword once again. The exchange was relentless, neither giving nor gaining ground. After a few clashes back and forth, Maximus managed to deliver a cut to Lawler's chest. His blood spilled onto the ground, hissing as it touched the ground. "You wound me, mortal," Lawler admitted, "but I do not bleed as you do." He swung again, and this time Maximus felt the full force of a god's fury. The blow sent him hurtling through the remains of Valyria, crashing through the stone walls as he dropped both his swords. He groaned, pushing himself up just in time to see Lawler standing over him. "You cannot stop what is inevitable," Lawler declared, raising his blade for the final strike. But Maximus did not just sit there and take that. Maximus caught his blade with his bare hands as he started to burn his hands despite how strong he was. He pulled the sword towards him, which also pulled Lawler closer. Using his free hand, he poured a ton of his power into his hand as he shoved it directly through Lawler's abdomen. Lawler let out an extremely loud scream, cracks appearing across his body. He had unleashed his magic power through Lawler's body, weakening him even more. Using this chance, Maximus grabbed both his swords again and turned to face Lawler, who was struggling to stand up. "You?" Lawler hissed, his voice trembling with fury and disbelief. "You dare?" Maximus wasted no time. He dashed forward, both Dawn's here and Duskfang igniting in black and white flames. With a single hop, he closed the distance, carving an X-shaped arc across Lawler's chest. He staggered back, his body beginning to break under the damage he had taken, spilling a ton of his blood on the ground. He let out another scream, this one not of rage, but of realization. "No, I am Lawler. I am eternal. I cannot be defeated." Maximus didn't let him speak further. With one final leap, he brought both swords down, driving them straight into Lawler's core. The impact sent a massive shockwave across the battlefield, forcing even demons and legions alike to halt their fighting. A terrible silence followed. Then Lawler exploded. A pillar of fire erupted from his form as his body collapsed inward, pulling the remnants of his mortal form. The above, once torn open by his arrival, began to close. The demonic forces, sensing the fall of their master, screamed in agony as their bodies crumbled into ash. The imperial legions stood in silence. Achilles and Alexander, bloodied, lifted their weapons high. Dane and his dwarves shouted in triumph, their war horns echoing through the ruined city. Olerin, Merlin, and Lilith lowered their hands, their magic no longer needed. He hoped that this was the end. A few seconds later, his question was answered as a system prompt popped up. Defeat the god Lawler and prevent the demonic invasion of the world. Rewards: minus 1 million system points. Minus 100,000 free summons. May choose to summon any number of any type of soldier for free without spending system points. The 100,000 free summons was something as he could literally summon any powerful soldier he wanted. In fact, he would say that it was better than the 1 million system points because it was free. Putting the prompt away, he turned towards his army, who was looking at him in silence. They were waiting for him, their emperor, to speak. "We have won," he roared. "We stood against a god and emerged victorious." A wave of cheers erupted from the legions, their joyous shouts shaking the earth beneath them. They had seen death, went against demonic creatures, and survived. Now they were celebrating their victory. Now that the war was actually over, Maximus ordered a count of their casualties and issued orders to start claiming the island for their own. The ruined capital of Valyria had lots of things from hundreds of years ago during the age of the Valyrian freehold. He wanted to find these riches and claim them for himself. In addition to this, he also planned to turn Valyria into a massive new citadel. It would be like a secondary capital for the Imperial Union, a new commercial hub for ships before they head to Carve and the rest of the East. After a week had passed, the final number of casualties was placed upon Maximus's desk. The number was a lot more than he expected. A total of 247,521 were dead out of the 600,000 people that Maximus brought with him. 123,432 were injured, leaving only 229,047 active soldiers to guard the region. The injured were not a problem, as they could be injured back to full health with the use of magic and other things. But to honor those who died, Maximus sent out an order for a part of the city to be dedicated to the dead warriors. A massive monolithic structure would be created and would house every single dead warrior's body alongside their name and the warrior's code, signifying that they willingly risked their lives to defend the world from evil. Tens of thousands of stonemasons and carpenters were already on their way to Valyria to start the reconstruction of city and the surrounding islands. Having been away from the going-ons of the rest of the world, Maximus had a pile of papers reporting on what happened in Westeros and Essos. In Westeros, a tourney had taken place in honor of Prince Joffrey's 12th named day as the crown prince. Maximus was invited to this, but he respectfully declined as he has other more important matters to attend to. In the north, Robb Stark had just returned from his studies in Heaven's Reach to Winterfell. He had spent the last 6 years studying at Heaven's Reach, learning some great skills in swordsmanship and leadership. House Stark was a great trading partner of the Imperial Union, importing most of their food from the Imperial Union because of how cheap it was. Dorne had sent a few coins and ships which contributed to the war effort. Not that Maximus needed it, but he could see that they were trying so hard to befriend him. Arianne had reached the age of 22, and she was getting more desperate by the day to hear his response to the proposal he received years ago. Since things were relatively calm now, he decided he would accept their offer and visit them personally to discuss who would be a part of his imperial harem. He had yet to have any kids, but now was as good a time as any to settle down and embrace the more lustful sides of being an emperor. The rest of Westeros didn't have anything of value, so he moved on to Essos. Migrants from the Far East had arrived in V's Dothrak in tattered clothes and with malnourished bodies, claiming to have run away from their lord who was slain. They fled their city out of fear for their new lord, but were cut off by his army and forced to flee further west, where they met with the Imperial Border Patrol and sent to V's Dothrak. The migrants were given refugee status and given food and clothing, while an emissary and investigation was launched into what was going on in the Far East. In Carve, the House of the Undying has begun moving their forces to combat the spread of the Imperial Union's influence. They began searching for allies in the Far East from amidst the warlords of ET. This was not a significant problem, but it was still something to keep an eye on, so he put Faraday and his Shadowhand agents on a mission to monitor Carve and all of its movements. Jaehaerys Targaryen, the younger brother of Viserys, yet was always within the shadow of his older brother, grew up hating Viserys. He often fought with Viserys and expressed his constant dislike of his mother Rhaella to her face. Maximus tried to show him some time ago that this was not the case, but he wasn't hearing it. As a result, he had fled the Imperial Union and had been missing since then. He managed to flee all the way to Carve, where he stood out because of his hair color. This caused him to get captured by one of the servants of the Pureborn, who were the noble rulers of Carve. The servant brought Jaehaerys to his master's residence and presented him as a gift to gain some favor. The servant's master, Sona Riccaris had taken a liking to Jaehaerys, whom he saw much potential in because of his lineage and the locked abilities that he had. Sona was a scheming man with a silver tongue and an uncanny ability to manipulate others. He took on Jaehaerys as a protege, seeing the boy's untapped potential and fiery spirit as tools he could command, and got to work immediately. He filled the young Targaryen's head with promises of power, whispering seeds of doubt about his family and fueling the resentment Jaehaerys harbored towards his older brother. And through it all, Sona positioned himself as a steadfast ally, the only person who truly understood and appreciated Jaehaerys' worth. Through it all, Jaehaerys was completely captured. His anger and emotions was used against him. Born in 280 AC, he was currently 18 years old, having fled the Imperial Union at 16. Before he left, he had received an education at the Imperial Academies, having gained a swath of knowledge. Now he was going to use that knowledge, plus the knowledge he would obtain, to get what he wanted. In Westeros, a few things were happening that would begin to change the balance of power on the continent. Jon Arryn had been killed inside of his own office. His body was found with his throat slit, sitting in his own chair within the Tower of the Hand. His death was a mystery, and King Robert ordered an immediate investigation. Using the network of spies belonging to the Master of Whispers, Varys, an accusation was quickly put forward that Jon had discovered a secret he should not have known and was killed for it. The hidden channels of the royal court buzzed with rumors, some implicating the Lannisters while others cast suspicion on House Baelish. In response to this, King Robert traveled to Winterfell personally to meet with his best friend, Eddard Stark. At first, Ned was reluctant to accept the position as he felt there was something ominous about Jon's death and was hesitant to leave Winterfell. His worries were amplified by a raven's letter from Lysa Arryn, Jon's widow. The letter stated, "My late husband was murdered by the Lannisters. Do not trust them. That which Cersei was either behind his death or the one that killed him because of something he found that she was hiding." The letter had been written in distressed, quick handwriting, letting him know that Lysa herself was also terrified. The visit from Robert pressuring him to go to King's Landing and the mysterious letter from Lysa left his mind congested with thoughts, most of which were nightmare scenarios. He contemplated his options, worried about the safety of his family, the future of his house, and tried to decide what course of action would serve everyone best. As he was lost in thought in his office, a shadow emerged from one of the dark corners of his room. "Lord Stark," the voice announced. Normally a person would get defensive, seeing a person emerging from the darkness and not using the door, but this wasn't the first time that Ned had a private talk with one of the Shadowhand agents. If you decided to go to King's Landing, you would uncover something that will change the entire continent and shift the balance of power between the houses. I can't say much, but you will uncover Jon Arryn's killer and help shape the continent for the better. The Shadowhand have decided to back you should you accept King Robert's appointment and will ensure that each member of your house remains protected," explained the agent, handing him a piece of paper that had some wise words on it. Ned took the letter from the Shadowhand agent. His brow wrinkled as he read the words written. "Truth is the foundation upon which justice stands. Deception may weave the tapestry of power, but it is always undone by the one thread of honesty. The cost of truth is high, but the cost of silence is greater." He stared at the words for a long moment, feeling the weight of them. He had always been a man of honor, a man who placed truth and justice above all else. And if Jon Arryn had been murdered for uncovering something that threatened the balance of power in the realm, then it was his duty to see that justice was done. Ned sighed, knowing there was only one choice he could make. He could not ignore the call to duty, no matter how ominous the circumstances surrounding Jon's death were. He stood up and turned to the Shadowhand agent. "I will accept Robert's appointment. So, tell them that if they mean to keep my family safe, they'd best be ready." The agent nodded and disappeared as quickly as he had come, leaving Ned alone with his thoughts. The next morning, he informed Robert of his decision. His wife, Catelyn, was not pleased, but she understood that her husband's sense of duty would not allow him to refuse. Preparations were made, and soon, Ned Stark, along with his daughters Sansa and Arya, rode south to King's Landing alongside King Robert and his retinue. Upon arriving in the capital, Ned was immediately thrown into the tangled web of politics that defined the royal court. He quickly discovered that the court was filled with secrets, whispered alliances, and backstabbing schemes. Littlefinger, the ever-smiling master of coin, extended a hand of friendship, while Varys, the master of whispers, observed him with an unreadable expression. Despite his distaste for courtly intrigue, Ned wasted no time in investigating Jon Arryn's death. He retraced Jon's final days, speaking with his former contacts and gathering any information he could. Maester Pycelle claimed Jon had slit his own throat at the heavy burden that being Hand of the King brought, but the old man's nervous demeanor made Ned suspicious. He also learned that Jon had been visiting an armorer's shop in the city before his death. Following this lead, Ned discovered the shop belonged to Tobo Mott, a master armorer known for his fine craftsmanship. There, he met a young apprentice, Gendry, a boy with strong Baratheon features. It was then that Ned realized what Jon Arryn had discovered. Robert Baratheon's bastards bore the strong, black-haired traits of their father, while his supposed children with Queen Cersei all had golden locks. The truth hit Ned like a hammer. Jon Arryn had learned that Robert's children were not his own. The heirs to the throne were not Baratheons. They were Lannisters, born of incest between Cersei and her brother Jaime. Understanding the gravity of his discovery, Ned sought counsel from Littlefinger, who urged him to move carefully. You have the truth, Lord Stark, but truth is not always enough. Power must be on your side before you act. Ned, however, was not one for deception or playing the Game of Thrones. He confronted Cersei directly, warning her to leave King's Landing before he revealed the truth to Robert. But Cersei did not flee. Instead, she moved swiftly. Before Ned could reach Robert, the king was mortally wounded in a hunting accident, an accident that was far too convenient. On his deathbed, Robert named Ned as regent and protector of the realm, but the decree was quickly dismissed by Cersei and her allies. When Ned attempted to take control and declare Stannis Baratheon as the rightful heir, he found himself betrayed. Littlefinger, whom he had trusted to support him, turned on him. The City Watch, whom he believed would enforce Robert's decree, instead turned their swords against him. Ned Stark was arrested on charges of treason and taken to the dungeons of the Red Keep. As he sat in his dark cell, he thought back to the words on the note given to him by the Shadowhand agent. The cost of truth is high, but the cost of silence is greater. He had chosen truth, and now he would pay the price for it. Yet, even in chains, he knew this was not the end of his story, nor the end of the storm that was coming for the realm. As he was tied up in the dungeons of the Red Keep, a Shadowhand agent had emerged once again from the darkness, holding a torch. Ned looked up as he tiredly asked, "Are they safe?" The Shadowhand agent nodded his head. "Yes, they're safe, Lord Stark. Both Sansa and Arya have been taken to one of our hideouts located within the city. The Queen has locked down the port, so we can't escort them back to Winterfell," the agent explained. "Thank you. I guess in the end, I must pay the price." The agent didn't say anything and just disappeared back into the darkness. While Ned Stark was being held by Queen Cersei in Heaven's Reach, the members of House Martell has arrived within the Imperial Palace in preparation for the wedding. Prince Doran Martell, who had been diagnosed with gout, had been completely healed by one of the Imperial healers several years ago. Because of this, he could walk normally and didn't need a stick to walk. The wedding bells echoed through the halls of the Imperial Palace. All throughout Imperial cities, the people were able to watch through the magic projectors created by dwarven craftsmen. As the last of the guests took their seats within the Grand Hall, the wedding began. Maximus was standing at the front of the altar, dressed in ceremonial attire. By his side stood Alexander and one of the priestess who worships Mother Royne. The priestess was the one who would oversee the marriage, as the worship of Mother Royne had become the dominant religion within the Imperial Union over recent years. Standing on the other side were the reformed Dashkaleen. The Dashkaleen used to be the former wives of Khals who had died. Now, they were turned into prominent figures who are now leaders of the religion, focused around the worship of the Great Stallion. These two were the most dominant religion within the Imperial Union, and both saw Maximus as a step below both the respective god and goddess and the chosen one. The hall fell silent as the huge double doors opened, revealing the entirety of the Imperium harem standing in wait. From front to back were Lilith, Merlin, Hela, Lyra, and then Arya Martell. The gathered nobles and dignitaries turned their heads as the doors fully opened, their gazes fixed upon the procession. Lilith, the first to enter, was draped in crimson silks embroidered with golden lining. Beside her, Merlin moved with her silver robes. Hela, clad in dark green lined with silver, walked with a presence that reminded all of her status as the mistress of death. Lyra followed, adorned in regal blue, the very image of noble serenity. Lastly, Arya Martell took slow, deliberate steps forward, dressed in flowing orange and gold, colors of House Martell. Gasps rippled through the hall as the women made their entrance. The Imperium harem was no ordinary collection of consorts. Each woman was a force unto herself, wielding power, influence, or in some cases, divine favor. Their very presence symbolized the unity of the Imperial Union. And now, with Ariane's inclusion, the bonds between Dorne and the Empire would be sealed. As Ariane approached the altar, Maximus looked at the dress that was made with Dornish craftsmanship. This was no mere political marriage. It was a statement to the world that Dorne was no longer a kingdom on the fringes, but now an integral part of the Imperial Union. Part of the agreement that was made between Prince Doran and Maximus was that Dorne would become an autonomous territory ruled by House Martell, as it had been for centuries. The Dornish were allowed to keep their culture and everything unique about them in exchange. They would also have to follow imperial established laws and few other things. Over 60% of the Dornish nobles agreed with the action taken by Prince Doran, claiming it to be securing Dorne's future and influence within Westeros. The other 40% claimed him to be bowing down to a foreign ruler and selling Dorne's independence. Unfazed by the political unrest, Ariana ascended the steps towards the altar, where she would take the pledge required by a foreigner when they are marrying the emperor. Ariane reached the top of the altar, standing before Maximus with her chin lifted. The grand hall remained silent as the priestess of Mother Royne raised a gilded staff, the symbol of her station, and began the sacred rite. Before the eyes of Mother Royne, the great stallion, and the empire itself, we bear witness to the union of Emperor Maximus and Princess Ariane Martell. This bond shall endure beyond war, beyond time, beyond death itself. Ariane turned slightly as two reformed Dashkaline stepped forward, one carrying a small, intricately carved basin of water from the Rhine, the other a bowl filled with sand from the vast Dothraki Sea. To marry the emperor is to become more than what you were, the priestess stated, dipping her hand into the water and anointing Ariane's forehead. You come from the rivers of the south, where the blood of old Valyria once mingled with that of the Rhoynar. Today, that blood shall mix with the lifeblood of the empire. The Dashkaline dipped her own fingers into the sand and traced a mark upon Ariane's hand. You walk as a daughter of Dorne, but now you shall ride with the empire as one of its own. Ariane did not flinch. She had been prepared for this moment by her father, for the weight it carried. She turned to Maximus and spoke in a clear voice. I, Ariane of House Martell, daughter of Dorne, pledge myself to you, Emperor Maximus. I shall stand beside you as one of your queens, bound in blood and duty, as one with the Imperial Union. Maximus stepped forward, and I, Maximus, Emperor of the Imperial Union, take you, Ariane Martell, as my wife and one of my queens. You shall rule beside me, and through time your wisdom and fire will guide the people. The priestess brought forth a ceremonial dagger, its blade forged by both Valyrian and Rhoynish smiths, and sliced a shallow cut into Maximus' palm, then Ariane's. Their blood mingled as they clasped hands, sealing the marriage in the ancient traditions of both Valyria and the Rhoynar. A light surrounded their joined hands, magic infused into the rite, marking the divine recognition of their union. The magic projectors displayed the sacred moment across the imperial cities. The people bore witness to the rise of the imperial harem. Cheers erupted from the crowd, a thunderous declaration that the union had been sealed. The title of queen was one that was chosen for members of the imperial harem. The title of empress was only reserved for the ruler of the imperium, similar to the title of empress. Lilith, Merlin, Hela, and Lyra were already known widely as the queens and didn't need to do the blood rite. They still went through the same thing as Ariane, and as they were officially granted the title of queen. Once all the official stuff was over, the festivities started. This is where all the nobles and other dignitaries relaxed and started to enjoy the atmosphere of the imperial palace. Maximus had also met the wife of Oleron. He couldn't believe at first that the old man had gotten married, but when he thought about it, Oleron was a man who had needs and such. Alexander and Achilles also had their guests who were not their wives yet. They often flirted with a number of women, but had not taken any wives yet. But seeing Maximus and Oleron get married made them want to find somebody to settle down with. Ianwe was in the middle, where he enjoyed his free life right now and didn't want to get settled down so soon. His lifespan was immense, and he didn't want to be held back because of commitment. Time passed, until night came around when the true fun began. Luckily, Maximus was a demigod now. If not, he probably wouldn't have enough energy for the amount of pleasure he would indulge in throughout the night. As the news reached Westeros in the next 2 weeks, the continent was thrown in an uproar. The newly crowned king of the Seven Kingdoms, Joffrey Baratheon, had caused a scene within the small council room after hearing about Dorne succeeding from crown. He called for war, but was shot down by his mother Cersei, who understood how to play the Game of Thrones and the power that the Imperial Union had. The small council backed her as well, claiming that they could not go to war with the Imperial Union yet with all of the things that were going on. He reluctantly accepted and instead ordered for the execution of Lord Stark. Cersei agreed, wanted to put on a little show of intimidation to draw his daughters out of wherever they were hiding. When the Ravens arrived at Winterfell, bearing news of Lord Stark's imprisonment and the disappearance of Sansa and Arya, Robb Stark felt the weight of the North suddenly fall upon his shoulders. He was young, but he was no fool. His father had always taught him to think before he acted, to never rush blindly into battle. But this was his father. The Hall of Winterfell was filled with lords sworn to House Stark, gathered at Robb's summons. They had heard the rumors, the whispers from the south. Lord Eddard had been accused of treason, King Robert was dead, and Joffrey Baratheon sat the Iron Throne. Now, with the news that Joffrey intended to execute Lord Stark, there was no more room for hesitation. "I will not sit idle while my father is butchered like a common criminal," Robb said, standing before his bannermen. "The Lannisters think the North will bend, that we will kneel like whipped dogs. But we are wolves, and wolves do not bow to lions." Cheers and shouts of approval rang through the hall. The North had been wary of Southern rule for generations, and now they had the perfect excuse to fight back. But Robb knew this was more than a simple act of rebellion. This was a game of power, and every move had to be played with precision. A raven had also come from the Shadowhand, its message brief but clear. "Your sisters are safe, but King's Landing is no place for them to remain for long. The game has begun, and your next move will decide the fate of the North." It was then that Theon Greyjoy, standing beside Robb, suggested a bold move. "The Rivellins stand between us and the South. If we march, we must have their support." Maester Luwin nodded. "Your grandfather, Lord Hoster Tully, will want vengeance for what has been done to Jon Arryn. But the Rivellins are vulnerable, caught between us and the Lannisters." Robb turned to his mother, Catelyn, who was seated nearby, her face pale but composed. "We need River Run," he said. "We need our mother's house." Catelyn met his gaze and nodded. "Then you must ride for war, my son, and may the old gods watch over you." The call went out across the North, and banners were raised. The direwolf of House Stark was gathering, and the Lannisters would soon learn what it meant to provoke the North. The news of Dorne's defection and the Imperial Union's power did not sit well with Lord Tywin Lannister. He read the reports in silence, his expression unreadable, but he was clearly frustrated. "The boy wants war," he said, referring to Joffrey. Foolish. A war with the Imperial Union would be suicide. Kevin Lannister nodded. Queen Cersei has kept him in check, but his temper will not hold. And now the North has raised its banners. The wolves mean to march. Tywin steepled his fingers. Then let them march. Let them spill blood for a dead man. We have bigger concerns. Dorne's departure was a disaster for the realm. The loss of its armies was one thing, but the greater concern was its alignment with the Imperial Union. If the Dornish brought their strength into a southern war, the balance of power in Westeros would shift beyond repair. We will deal with the Starks first, Tywin said at last. Then, we will prepare for what comes next. Far to the south, Renly Baratheon read the same reports and saw a different opportunity. With Robert dead and Stannis claiming Dragonstone, the kingdom was fractured. If the North marched, if war consumed the realm, there would be a chance for him to make his own move. But the Imperial Union, that was something else. They did not just take Dorne, Renly said as he stood on the ramparts of Storm's End. They are reshaping the world. Ser Loras Tyrell, standing beside him, scoffed. Then let them shape it. We still have a throne to take. Renly smiled, but in the back of his mind, he knew that the game was changing. If he wanted to be king, he could not just play against his brothers and the Lannisters. He would have to watch the Imperial Union, for they were not just players in the game, they were becoming the game itself. Stannis read the news alongside the letter from Ned Stark in his chamber. He had long had a feeling that Joffrey was not Robert's true son, and now that Ned Stark had been imprisoned for discovering the truth. It was an outrage, but more than that, it was an opportunity. The throne is mine by right, Stannis declared to Ser Davos. And I will take it. Davos hesitated. My lord, the Imperial Union is growing in strength. Their influence now reaches across the seas. We must tread carefully or try to convince them that our cause is just. Stannis narrowed his eyes. Carefully? I will not sit by while my throne is stolen. We must act, Davos. We must find allies before it is too late. And so, he prepared for war. Meanwhile, across the sea, in the city of Carve, Jaehaerys Targaryen had just been spotted by a Shadowhand agent, within one of the residences belonging to the 13 of Carve. Unlike other places, Carve had warlocks, which are powerful magic users with powerful abilities. The 13 were the most powerful of the warlocks, and had employed the most powerful warlocks under them. The ones sent to help out the slave cities some years ago were not even the best of the best. This made spying on them significantly harder than other places. They already had several close calls where Shadowhand agents almost had their cover blown, so now they had to play it safe. The report was made and sent back to Heaven's Reach, alerting them where Jaehaerys was.